Make sure they never find the body. Richard Blackwood said it the way most men order lunch. One hand signing a document, the other wrapped around a glass of scotch. No hesitation, no pause. Just a quiet, absolute sentence delivered to the man standing across his desk, and then he went back to his paperwork, like he hadn't just condemned a woman to die alone in the North Pacific Ocean. 3 days of freezing water, no rescue, no witnesses, clean, simple, permanent. He had erased people before. He knew exactly how long the ocean takes. What he did not know, what would destroy everything he had built, was that she had been recording him for years. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me. Every single minute of what comes next matters. The North Pacific Ocean does not forgive. It does not negotiate. It does not slow down for the desperate or the brave. It takes what falls into it, and it holds it there deep and cold and absolute until there is nothing left to identify. Sailors know this. Coast Guard commanders know this. And Richard Blackwood's people knew this better than anyone, which is exactly why they chose the ocean. 3 days. That is what they gave her. Not out of mercy, not out of hesitation. They chose 3 days because the science was simple and brutal. A human body immersed in water, temperatures close to freezing, loses core heat 4 times faster than in open air. After 12 hours, hypothermia begins shutting down muscle control. After 24 hours, the body starts making decisions the mind no longer controls. After 72 hours, there is typically nothing left to rescue. 3 days was not a sentence. It was a calculation. And Blackwood's people were very, very good at calculations. What they were not good at, what they had never once accounted for, was her. At 5:40 in the morning on a day when the sky over the North Pacific was the color of old iron and the waves were tall enough to swallow a small vessel whole, a United States Navy rescue helicopter out of Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island, picked up something on their thermal imaging display that none of them could immediately explain. It was a heat signature. Faint, inconsistent, almost buried beneath the noise of the ocean's surface, almost. Commander Ethan Walker was not a man who got excited easily. 22 years in naval aviation had given him the kind of steady that most people spend their whole lives searching for. He had pulled bodies out of the Bering Sea. He had flown through conditions that grounded every other aircraft on the tarmac. He had seen what the ocean does to people and what it takes from families, and he had learned a long time ago to keep the emotional part of his brain quiet until after the mission was complete. But when he looked at that thermal display at 5:40 in the morning, 200 miles off the Washington coast, his first thought was not professional. His first thought was, that's not possible. Chief Reed, he said over the intercom, his voice deliberately flat, I need you to look at something. In the rescue swimmer's position at the back of the helicopter, Chief Marcus Reed was already suited up. He leaned forward and stared at the display. He did not say anything for a long moment. That's a body, he finally said. That's what I thought, Walker said. Alive. Walker looked again at the heat signature. It was weak. It was flickering at the edges, the way heat signatures do when a body is right at the boundary of what thermal imaging can detect. But it was there. It was continuous. And it was moving not dramatically, not in the way of someone waving for rescue, but in the small, almost imperceptible way that a living body moves because it cannot completely stop itself from moving. Alive, Walker confirmed. Reed pulled down his dive mask. Let's go get them. What they found when they descended through the cloud cover, and the spray was something that Walker would spend the rest of his career trying to find the right words to describe. A young woman. She was lying on a broken section of what appeared to have been a ship's deck panel, maybe 12 feet across, maybe 15, barely enough to keep her above the waterline when the swells pushed it down. She was not curled into herself the way a hypothermic survivor usually is. She was not screaming. She was not waving her arms. She was lying on her back, which is actually the wrong instinct for heat preservation. But what Marcus Reed noticed before he registered any of that was the thing she was holding. A rifle, not clutched to her chest like a life preserver, not draped across her like something she'd fallen asleep holding. She was holding it the way a professional holds a weapon when they are waiting, both hands in contact, body oriented correctly, the muzzle pointing away from her own face, and away from any direction that would cause her to accidentally sweep herself if her grip slipped. Even now, even after 3 days, even after whatever had put her in that ocean in the first place. Her trigger finger was outside the guard. Reed had done hundreds of open water rescues. He had approached panicked civilians. He had approached injured fishermen who grabbed him with the strength of people who believed they were drowning. He had approached hypothermic individuals who no longer recognized the difference between rescue swimmer and ocean. He knew what survivors looked like. He knew the full spectrum of what 3 days of open water trauma does to a human being's ability to respond to external stimulus. He put his hand on her shoulder. Her eyes opened, not slowly, not in the groggy, confused way of someone pulled back from the edge of unconsciousness. They opened completely immediately and with a clarity that made Reed's chest tighten because it was so deeply wrong for the circumstances. Blue eyes, the color of deep water, and focused. She grabbed his wrist. Not desperately, not like a drowning woman. She grabbed it with 2 fingers and a thumb in a precise grip that Reed immediately recognized as a control technique. The kind of thing you learn when you are trained to restrain someone larger than yourself without losing the ability to release them quickly if the situation changes. She held it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at his face, at his gear, at the markings on his wetsuit, and she let go. "Reed," she said. Her voice was raw from salt water and exposure, but it was steady. "Chief Marcus Reed, Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island." Reed stared at her. "How do you know my name?" he asked. She did not answer. She pushed herself into a seated position, and Reed reached for her arm to help, and she did not pull away from the help, but she did not lean into it either. She accepted it the way a person accepts assistance when they have assessed that accepting it is the most efficient choice. "I need my rifle," she said. "Ma'am, I need to get you in the harness." "I need my rifle first," she said again, and her voice had a quality to it that Reed had encountered before in exactly one category of person. "I'm not leaving it here." Reed looked up at the helicopter. Commander Walker's voice came into his earpiece. "What's the holdup, Chief?" "She won't leave the weapon," Reed said. A pause. "Can she move on her own?" Reed looked at her. She was already on her feet. She was swaying not much but enough for Reed to track, but she was on her feet, and she had the rifle in a 2-handed carry that suggested several thousand hours of muscle memory. "Affirmative," Reed said. "Bring them both up," Walker said. She managed the harness herself. She clipped the rifle to her body using a secondary line that Reed did not know she had until she produced it from somewhere on her person. She looked at him once before they ascended, and her expression was not relief, and it was not gratitude, and it was not the particular broken openness of someone who has been pulled back from death. It was assessment. She was assessing him the same way he would assess a new team member in the field, quickly, thoroughly looking for the things that mattered and filing away the things that did not. Reed thought, "Who are you?" He did not ask. Not yet. On the helicopter, Dr. Lena Morris, the flight surgeon attached to Walker's team, that morning attempted a standard trauma assessment the moment they were airborne. The woman, she gave her name as Emily. Just Emily, no last name, no rank, no unit, cooperated with the physical portions of the examination and answered none of the situational questions. "Emily, can you tell me where you've been?" "I need water." Morris handed her a water bottle. She drank exactly 1/3 of it and stopped. "Slow intake," Morris said, reaching for the bottle. "I know," Emily said. She did not give the bottle back. She took another controlled sip. "Emily, your core temperature is low but not critical," Emily said. "My respiratory rate has been consistent for the last 6 hours. My cognitive function is intact." She paused. "I have some damage in the tissue of my left hand. I'll need that looked at when we land. Nothing else is structural." Morris looked at Walker. Walker looked at the rifle Emily had not relinquished. "Emily," he said, and something about the way he said it, not as a command, not as a clinical designation, but just as a name. A person's name made her turn and look at him directly for the first time. "My name is Commander Ethan Walker. You're safe right now. I need you to understand that." "I understand that you believe that," she said. "What does that mean?" She turned back to the window. "It means the people who put me in that water are going to know I'm not in it anymore within 6 hours of us landing. Probably faster." She took another careful sip of water. "So the window for safe is shorter than you think, Commander." Walker stared at the back of her head for a long moment. Then he keyed his radio and changed their landing destination. He did not file a standard rescue report. He did not call in to base. He diverted the helicopter to a secondary facility used by his unit, a location that was not on the standard operational manifest, and he did it before he had any idea why he trusted her enough to do it. He just did. At the medical facility, the examination took 4 hours. Emily Carter, they had a last name by then, extracted not from any government database, but from a small metal tag sewn inside the lining of her tactical vest. The kind of thing you do when you want someone to be able to identify you, but you do not want that identification to be obvious. Emily Carter was in significantly better condition than she should have been. Not good condition. Her left hand had genuine soft tissue damage from sustained cold exposure. She had lost close to 20% of her body's normal blood volume to dehydration. She had 2 cracked ribs, though the treating physician noted these appeared older than 3 days and had likely been sustained before whatever event had placed her in the water. She had a constellation of bruises across her torso that told a story the physician could not yet read. But she was alive. Not barely alive, not alive in the technical sense of still generating detectable cardiac activity. Alive in the full and functional sense of the word. Her blood panels came back with numbers that the attending doctor, a Navy physician named Lieutenant Commander James Okafor, read twice before saying anything. "These are wrong," he said. "What do you mean?" Walker asked. "I mean these numbers are wrong for someone who spent 72 hours in the North Pacific." Okafor set the tablet down and rubbed his face. Her electrolyte levels are low, but not catastrophic. Her kidney function is compromised, but not failed. Her inflammatory markers are elevated, but within a range I'd expect from someone who had a very bad weekend camping, not someone who should be on dialysis right now. He paused. She was controlling her fluid intake, out there, on the water. She had supply. She had nothing, Reed said from the doorway. He had not left. He had come in with them and simply not been asked to leave, and no one had thought to ask him because Walker wanted him there, and Walker was in command. Whatever was on that ship, she didn't bring it with her. She had the clothes she was wearing, one secondary line, in the rifle. Then how? She did it herself, Reed said. Controlled breathing, minimized movement, conserved heat by staying still instead of fighting. She wasn't surviving out there. She was managing. Okafor looked at the blood panels again. Then he looked at Walker. "Commander, I've seen a lot of survival cases come through this facility. I've never seen numbers like these from someone with her exposure time. This woman was trained for exactly this kind of situation." Walker nodded slowly. "I know." "What do you know about who she is?" "Almost nothing," Walker said. He picked up his radio. "Which means we need to find out." He sent Emily's fingerprints through the standard identification channels. He sent her DNA through the secondary military identification database. He ran her photograph through facial recognition software tied to 3 separate intelligence archives. He waited. The results came back in under 2 hours, which was faster than he expected, and they were not what he expected either. Nothing. Not a limited file, not a classified file he did not have clearance to access. Not a sealed record or an expunged record or a record transferred to a different department. Nothing. Emily Carter did not exist in any database available to Commander Ethan Walker of the United States Navy SEALs. He walked back to her room. She was sitting up in the bed, still holding the rifle. A nurse had attempted to take it when Emily was first transferred, and Emily had not argued or resisted. She had simply looked at the nurse with those cold blue eyes and said very quietly, "I understand that's what you need to do. I'm telling you that if you take this rifle, people are going to die because of it. I would like you to think about whether that's worth the policy." The nurse had looked at the doctor. The doctor had looked at Walker, and Walker had said, "Leave it." Now he pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down. "Your name doesn't appear in any database I can access," he said. "I know," she said. "You knew that before we picked you up." "Yes." "Who erased you?" She looked at him for a long moment, not sizing him up this time. Something more complicated than that, like she was making a decision about him that she had not yet finished making. Like she was weighing something that had nothing to do with his rank or his skill set, and everything to do with the question of whether he was the kind of man who would still be in that chair after she told him what she needed to tell him. "The same people who built me," she said. Walker waited. "And before you asked," she said, "I don't mean that metaphorically." Weapons specialist Daniel Hayes had been with Walker's unit for 6 years. He had a gift for understanding how things worked, not just weapons, though weapons were his particular specialty, but systems, mechanisms, the way components relate to each other and why they fail when they do. He could look at an unfamiliar piece of equipment and within a few minutes begin to understand its logic, the thinking behind its design, the priorities it expressed in metal and engineering. He had never seen anything like Emily's rifle. He had it on the examination table in the unit's secure room. A spacewalker had cleared of all non-essential personnel before Hayes began his work, and he had been sitting with it for 45 minutes before he said a single word. Walker waited. Hayes picked up the rifle, examined the action, set it down, picked up the barrel assembly, looked at the tolerances, under magnification, set it down, turned it over, looked at the stock, turned it back. "This isn't manufactured," he said finally. "What do you mean?" "I mean there is no manufacturer. There's no serial number. I think you already knew that, but it's not just the absence of a number. It's the absence of the system that would produce a number. The tool marks on these components. You put tool marks on things when you're using machinery designed for production runs. These marks are from individual tool work. Every component of this rifle was hand-built." He ran his thumb along the receiver. "By someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Better than anyone I've ever seen." "Can you tell anything about where it was built?" "Not yet." Hayes picked up the stock and turned it over in his hands. He pressed on the heel of the stock, then the toe, then a spot just forward of center that to Walker's eyes looked identical to every other spot on the stock's underside. Something clicked, a panel barely larger than a playing card released from the stock. Hayes set the stock down and looked at what had come out of it. A data module, small matte black with a single microport on one end. No markings. Hayes looked at Walker. Walker looked at the module. "Can you access it?" Walker asked. "I can try," Hayes said. "But Commander, whatever's on there, whoever put it there, didn't want it to be accessed easily. This is a custom design, and I've never seen this port format before. I'm going to need time." "How much time?" Hayes thought. "Give me 4 hours." Walker gave him 3. Oh. Emily woke up after 2 hours of sleep, which was apparently all she intended to take. She came looking for Walker, which was how he found her in the corridor outside the secure room, standing at the door, not trying to open it, just standing there with her arms at her sides and her expression doing that thing it did where it gave nothing away and still somehow communicated something. "Your man is working on the module," she said. "Yes." "He won't be able to open it without the secondary key," she said. "Do you have it?" She was quiet for a moment. "What do you know about me so far, Commander? What has your team been able to determine?" Walker considered whether to answer. He decided the only way this worked was if he treated her the way he would treat an equal, which was with honesty. "You're military trained, probably not conventional military. The skills are too specific. Your physical conditioning is exceptional and specific to the kind of conditioning you'd see in special operations. You are trained in weapons handling survival protocols, and what I'm going to guess is close quarters contact." He paused. "You're also trained in something I don't have a precise category for, the way you managed your exposure, the way you assessed my team when we picked you up, the way you've been managing every interaction since we brought you in." He met her eyes. "You were trained to operate completely alone in environments where no one was coming to help you, and to do it for extended periods." She looked at him for a long moment. "The program that trained me is called the Meridian Protocol," she said. "You won't find that name in any database either. It doesn't officially exist." She leaned against the wall. "I was 17 when they recruited me. I was 29 when I went into that water. 12 years, 17 missions." Walker felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature in the corridor. 17, he repeated. "All recorded," she said. "The module contains every mission file, every target package, weather data, environmental conditions, shot data, everything." She paused. "I designed it that way. I built the recording system into the rifle over the course of 3 years, adding components during maintenance windows when I had access to the weapon. By the time they realized what I'd done, it was too late to extract the data without destroying it." "Why?" She looked at him as though the question was very simple. "Because they were going to kill me eventually," she said. "And I needed to make sure that when they did it would matter, that it would mean something, that someone would know what happened and what they did and to who." Her voice did not waver. Her expression did not change. But something in the quality of the silence around the words felt very different from anything else she had said. I wasn't going to let them make me disappear. Not completely. Walker opened the door to the secure room. Daniel, he said, she has the key. Chido. Hayes looked up from the module. Emily walked to the table. She picked up the module and turned it over twice in a specific pattern, not just turning it, but applying pressure to 2 points simultaneously while rotating it. The kind of sequence that looks like nothing if you don't know what you're looking at, and she pressed the microport against the edge of Hayes's laptop in a precise angle, held it for exactly 3 seconds, and then set it down. A connection request appeared on Hayes's screen. He looked at it. He looked at her. He accepted it. The files began to transfer. Walker watched them both. Emily watching the transfer progress with an expression that was not relief and was not triumph. Something older and more complicated, and Hayes watching the files come through with the expression of someone who understands numbers and is beginning to understand what these numbers mean. Emily, Walker said. She looked at him. The last file, he said, the 412-meter shot. Yes, she said. Blackwood? Yes. Walker had known the name was coming from the moment she started talking. He had known it the way you know certain things when enough of the context has assembled itself around a shape that you already recognize. Richard Blackwood, defense contractor, owner of Meridian Global Security Solutions, a company that held contracts with 7 federal agencies and 4 allied governments. A man who had been photographed with senators, with generals, with 2 of the last 3 secretaries of defense. A man whose death had been reported 3 days ago. An apparent heart attack while aboard his private vessel in international waters. You killed him, Walker said. Yes, Emily said. From 112 meters. From 213 meters, actually. The module records from the position of the shot, not the target. The difference matters for the ballistic calculations. She said it without a trace of pride, purely technical. He was on the deck of his boat. I was on a ridge. She paused. It was the last thing I could do before they found my position. I had maybe 90 seconds between the shot and when I had to move. I used 87 of them. Where were the other 3? She looked at him steadily, saying his name. The room was completely quiet. Hayes had stopped typing. Walker looked at this woman who had spent 12 years being built into a weapon, who had spent the last 3 days keeping herself alive on the surface of the Pacific with nothing but trained discipline and the specific kind of willpower that does not come from wanting to survive, but from refusing to let the people who tried to destroy you succeed. And he said the only thing he could think of that was worth saying. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Emily Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled her chair to the table, set the rifle across her knees, and began to talk. She started with the recruitment. She had been 17. She had been exceptional academically, athletically, and in the particular kind of assessment exercises that she had been told were college entrance evaluations, and that she understood now, looking back, were selection tests for something else entirely. She had grown up without a father and with a mother who worked double shifts and did not ask many questions about where the scholarship money came from. She had been grateful. She had been ambitious. And she had been young enough to believe that when serious, well-dressed people told you that your country needed you, that was a thing worth responding to. They didn't lie to me about what I would be doing, she said. Not exactly. They told me I would be trained as a precision operator, that the work would be hard and dangerous and classified, that I would be protecting national security, that the people I was assigned to deal with were genuine threats, terrorists, proliferators, people who were actively working to cause mass casualties. She paused. For the first 4 years, that was true. Or at least I believed it was true. I believed it because they gave me everything: target packages, intelligence assessments, legal authorizations. Everything documented, everything justified. When did it change? Walker asked. Gradually, she said, and that's the part I have to be honest about, because I didn't want to see it. The first mission that didn't feel right, I told myself I was missing context, that I didn't have the full picture, that the people running the program had information I wasn't cleared for. She looked at the rifle across her knees. That's the thing they counted on. They built enough legitimate operations into the program that by the time the work started changing, you had already built a relationship with the results. You had already told yourself 100 times that you were doing what needed to be done. And then the next operation comes in and it's slightly different, slightly harder to justify. And you've already said yes so many times that saying no feels like the strange thing. She described the missions in the flat, precise language of someone who had spent 12 years being trained to narrate accurately and without embellishment. The fourth mission in year 2 that made her ask a question she was told was above her clearance level. The seventh mission in year 4 that targeted a man she could find no intelligence connection for, and that she completed because she was given a legal authorization document that appeared genuine. The 11th mission in year 7 when she began keeping her own records. "Why did you start keeping records?" Reed asked. He was in the corner of the room and he had been quiet for so long that Walker had almost forgotten he was there. Emily looked at him. Something changed in her face, not much, but enough. "Because the 12th mission target was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen," she said. "She was a biomedical researcher. She worked for a university. She had 2 children. She had published papers about corrupted clinical trial data for a pharmaceutical company that had significant contracts with Meridian Global Security Solutions." She stopped. She started again. She had never threatened anyone. She had never built anything dangerous. She had simply found numbers that were wrong and written them down and submitted them to a journal that was going to publish them. The room was quiet. "I didn't take the mission," Emily said. "I reported back that I had taken it, and then I disappeared for 3 weeks. And when I came back, they believed the job was done because Sarah Chen had moved her family to another country and gone completely dark, which I told her to do." She looked at Walker. "That was when I became a loose end." "How long ago?" Walker asked. 8 months, she said. "I've been running since then, building the case, documenting everything I could reach, and positioning for the one shot that would make all of it impossible to ignore." "Blackwood," Walker said. "Blackwood had been running the program since the beginning," she said. "Not Meridian as the public knows it. The part underneath, the part that held the real contracts, the real authorizations, the real money. He wasn't just aware of what was happening. He was the architect." She looked at Hayes, who was still staring at his screen with an expression Walker had never seen on him before. "Everything in that module connects back to him. Every mission file, every authorization signature, every financial transfer." She paused. "It's all there." Hayes turned the laptop slowly so they could see the screen. He had been working through the files while she talked, cataloging what he could, and what was visible on the screen at that moment was a mission authorization document. At the bottom, over what appeared to be a digital signature, was a name, Richard Blackwood. Under it, in the way these documents always specify the authority being invoked, was a line Walker had to read twice. "Authorized under Executive Program, Meridian, classification above top secret. Signatories are Blackwood, Meridian, GSSD, Carmichael, O'Neill, Park, NSC." Walker stood very still. Hayes did not say anything. Reed from the corner said very quietly, "Walker." "I see it," Walker said. "ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. NSC, the National Security Council." Walker looked at Emily. "How many people know what's in these files?" "Before today," she said, "just me." "And now," she looked at him steadily, "now 3 more." She glanced at Hayes, then at Reed. 4. "Emily," Walker said, "I need you to understand something. Tell me, the people listed in those files, if this is what it appears to be, they have reach. Real reach. Not just legal resources, not just public relations capacity. They have the ability to make problems disappear. They've been doing it." He held her gaze. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand exactly what you're saying, Commander," she said. And for the first time since Reed had touched her shoulder on that wreckage in the North Pacific, Emily Carter's voice changed, not much, but enough for Walker to hear it. "They've been making people disappear for 12 years. I know exactly what they're capable of." She set the rifle on the table. "That's why I built the black box," she said. "Not as a record, as a proof of authenticity. Every mission file in that module is linked to the ballistic data from every shot I ever took. The environmental conditions, the atmospheric calculations, the physical evidence that can be independently verified from satellite weather records and geolocation data." She tapped the module. "You can't fake this. You can't say these files were manufactured. Every document is tied to a physical, real-world event that left evidence in multiple independent databases. The shot data validates the mission files, The mission files validate the shot data. They prove each other. Hayes was nodding slowly the way he nodded when he was following something complex and recognizing that it was correct. She built the evidence so it's self-authenticating, he said to Walker. You can't undermine one piece without undermining all of it. And you can't undermine all of it without simultaneously discrediting 12 years of documented data across multiple independent data sources. Is it solid? Walker asked him. Hayes looked at the screen for a long moment. Commander, he said, I've been looking at evidence chains for 6 years in this unit. I've never seen anything this tight. Walker looked at Emily. She looked back at him. Outside the secure room in the corridor, a sound, small, brief, the kind of sound that buildings make constantly, the kind of sound that means nothing in a normal facility on a normal day. Reed was on his feet before Walker could move. Walker, he said. I heard it, Walker said. He looked at Emily. She had already picked up the rifle. Her finger was outside the trigger guard. Her eyes were on the door. They found us, she said, not as a question, not as a panicked declaration. As a factual statement from someone who had spent 3 days in the North Pacific expecting exactly this moment. How, Walker said. They're very good, Emily said, and they've been looking for 6 hours. She looked at him. I told you the window was shorter than you thought. Walker keyed his radio. His team responded in under 10 seconds. And Emily Carter, who had survived the North Pacific Ocean in 3 days without supplies and 12 years of being turned into something she hadn't chosen to become. Emily Carter stood up and held her weapon correctly and looked at the door with those cold blue eyes and waited. She had been waiting for this moment in some form for a very long time. She was ready. The sound in the corridor lasted exactly 2 seconds, then silence. Reed had his back against the wall beside the door, weapon drawn, and he was looking at Walker with an expression that asked a question without using any words. Walker shook his head once. Not yet. He turned to Hayes and pointed at the laptop. Hayes understood immediately. He began copying the transferred files to an encrypted drive, working fast and quiet, the kind of practice speed that comes from having done exactly this kind of thing under exactly this kind of pressure before. His fingers did not shake. That was the thing Walker always noticed about Hayes under stress. The man's hands never shook. Everything else about him might be screaming internally, but his hands always stayed steady, because steady hands were the difference between data that survived and data that didn't. Emily had not moved from her position. She was standing with the rifle in a low ready, carry her body angled slightly toward the door, her breathing so controlled it was almost invisible. Walker watched her for half a second and made a decision that he would think about later. When there was time to think, he decided she was not the threat in this room, whatever she had done, whatever she had been built to do. Right now, in this specific moment, the threat was on the other side of that door, and Emily Carter was on his side of it. That was the only calculation that mattered. How many? He asked her quietly. She tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they are listening to something internal rather than external, processing information that nobody else in the room had access to. At least 4, she said. Probably 6. They won't come in loud. They'll want the module first and the bodies after. You've seen their protocols before. I helped write them, she said. Walker processed that for exactly 1 second, then let it go. There would be time for that conversation later. Right now he needed to move, and moving meant making decisions faster than the people on the other side of that door were making theirs. He keyed his radio on the channel his team used for non-standard operations, a secondary frequency that was not connected to base communications, and that only his unit knew about. Bravo team, I need a perimeter check on the east service corridor and the roof access point at the north end of the building. Non-standard approach. Treat as hostile until I say otherwise. The response came back in under 15 seconds. Copy, Commander. We have movement on the east corridor. 2 contacts. Moving slow. How slow? Professional slow. Walker looked at Reed. Reed was already moving toward the secondary exit. The next 4 minutes happened in the compressed, hyper-specific way that close-quarters situations always happen. Not in the cinematic sequence that people imagine from the outside, but in a series of individual decisions made at a speed where the decision and the action are almost the same thing, where training replaces thought, because thought is simply too slow for what the situation demands. His team engaged the 2 contacts in the east corridor. Non-lethal. Walker had given that instruction in the clearest possible terms before any of this started. He needed people alive to answer questions, and he needed the situation to remain something that could be explained through official channels rather than something that required careful burial afterward. His team was good enough to honor both requirements simultaneously, which was one of the reasons Walker had fought through 3 consecutive command rotations to keep them together. The 2 contacts went down. A third contact positioned on the roof heard the movement below and made the immediate decision to retreat rather than advance. That decision told Walker something important. These were not people who had been ordered to complete the mission at any cost. They had a threshold, a point at which the risk calculation shifted from advance to withdraw, and that threshold was lower than it would be for true program personnel. Emily had been right, second tier. Walker's team logged the retreat and tracked the direction the third contact moved. By the time Walker walked out of the secure room into the corridor, it was over the 2-minute 40-second version of over that leaves everyone's hands shaking slightly, even when they have the training not to show it. He looked at the 2 men his team had secured on the floor. They were unconscious. Professional gear, the kind of equipment that costs serious money and leaves no paper trail. No identifying insignia anywhere. Weapons that were high quality, expensive, and completely untraceable, the same logic as Emily's rifle applied to an entire operational loadout. He crouched down and looked at the nearest man's face. He did not recognize him. Emily, he said without turning around. He knew she was behind him. He had already learned that Emily Carter positioned herself with sight lines to all relevant points, simultaneously without appearing to do so deliberately. She looked at both faces without crouching, without any change in her expression. Then she said, second-tier contractors, not core program personnel. She straightened up. Blackwood used layers. The people who know everything are never the people he sends first. What does second tier mean operationally? It means they know they were hired to retrieve a specific object from a specific location and that anything in their way was authorized to be removed, she said. They don't know why. They don't know who they're actually working for beyond a cutout contact. They know a payment amount and a memorized contact number, and when the job is done or compromised, that number goes dark within the hour. She looked at Walker. These 2 being here means someone tracked us from the rescue site, which means either the helicopter's transponder was monitored or someone at Whidbey Island is connected to Blackwood's network. Walker felt the weight of that settle in his chest, not panic, something colder and more focused than panic. Whidbey Island, his base, his people, except apparently not all of his people. Hayes, he said. Hayes appeared in the secure room doorway. Drive is copied. Files are intact. I've got them in 3 separate encrypted locations, 2 of which are already off-site and uploading. Good, Walker turned to Reed. Get the vehicle. We're not staying here. Reed was already in motion before the sentence finished. They were out of the building in 6 minutes. 6 minutes from the moment Walker made the call to the moment all 4 of them were in the vehicle moving away from the facility, which was fast by any standard, and which still felt too slow given what Walker now understood about the capability of the people looking for them. Emily got in the back without being asked and positioned herself with her back against the door and the rifle across her knees in the specific way of someone who has spent a significant portion of their adult life needing to be ready to move in any direction at any moment. Hayes was in the front passenger seat, laptop already open, the encrypted drive already connected. Reed drove. He drove fast, and he drove with the total attention of someone who is watching not just the road, but the full environment around the road, the vehicles behind them, the vehicles ahead, the side streets and the entrance ramps, and the places where a following vehicle could reacquire them after dropping back far enough to avoid being obvious. Emily said nothing for the first 7 miles. Walker sat beside her in the back and let the silence be what it was, which was not uncomfortable, but was full of the specific weight of everything that had just happened and everything that had been revealed and everything that still needed to be understood. He was processing. He assumed she was processing. He had learned in 22 years of command that some silences deserve to be interrupted and some deserve to be honored, and this one was the second kind. It was Hayes who finally broke it, and he did it without looking up from the laptop, which was his way of signaling that what he was about to say was coming from the data rather than from whatever emotional processing he was doing underneath the surface. Emily, he said, the mission file for Operation 12, the authorization document. He paused for exactly the right amount of time, The pause of a man who is looking at something and making sure he is reading it correctly before he says it out loud. You said Blackwood signed all of them. Everyone, she said. The co-signatories, Hayes said. Carmichael at ODNI, Park at NSC. Are these real people currently active? Douglas Carmichael, Emily said. He's been deputy director at ODNI for 6 years. Before that, he ran a joint intelligence task force out of Stuttgart for 4 years. He was the face of the program. For the first 2 years, the person I reported to directly, the person who gave me my mission packages in the early operations. She paused. I trusted him completely. For the first 3 years, I would have said there was no one in the program I trusted more. And Park, Linda Park, NSC, before she transitioned to a position at a private defense think tank 18 months ago. She was the legal architect of the entire authorization framework, the person who designed the documentation structure that made the program appear legitimate on paper and legally defensible through every classification layer. A pause. She was exceptional at what she did. You would look at those authorization documents and they would hold up under any standard review. The language was precise. The legal citations were accurate. The classification protocols were correct in every detail. Emily's voice had a quality Walker could not quite name. Not admiration, not bitterness, exactly. Something more like the complicated acknowledgement of skill in someone who used that skill against you. That was the point. Make it look so legitimate that no one would look harder. Hayes turned around. His expression was the expression of a man who is good at putting pieces together and has just watched several very large pieces align in a way that fundamentally changes the shape of everything around them. Emily Carmichael and Park are not mid-level functionaries. These are people who were at the center of the national security decision-making infrastructure. If their names are on these documents, I know, she said. If these files go public in an uncontrolled way, I know, she said again. The repetition was not dismissive. It carried the specific weight of someone who has spent 8 months knowing exactly what the consequences of this information becoming public would be, and who has spent every one of those months making sure that when it happened, it would be as controlled as possible. That's why I needed someone like you to verify the files first. Not because I need you to believe me. Because the people I'm planning to give these to will need to know that the evidence chain was handled correctly from the moment of transfer. Hayes turned back to his laptop. Walker watched Emily's face. She was looking at the road now, but she was not seeing the road. She's in that interior geography that he had noticed before, the place where she kept the version of events that she had been carrying alone for too long. He recognized it because he had seen it before in operators who had been deep undercover and finally come back in intelligence officers who had managed unilateral operations with no backup. The particular loneliness of being the only person who knows something that matters. How long did you plan this? He asked her. Not as an interrogation, as a genuine question between two people who are beginning to understand each other. She considered the question honestly, which he had already noticed was her default. She did not give easy answers. She gave accurate ones. The planning started seriously about 3 years before I went into the water, she said. The data collection started in year 7 of the program. The technical build, adding the recording module to the rifle, that took 2.5 years working during maintenance windows when I had legitimate access to the weapon. She glanced at him. I had to do it gradually. A new component here, a firmware update there. Nothing that would show up as an anomaly during routine inspection. How did you know they wouldn't find it? Because I was the one who ran the routine inspections, she said. And for the first time, something that was almost not quite, but almost a smile crossed her face. It was gone in less than a second. They trusted me with the weapon completely. They had no reason not to. I had never given them a reason not to trust me. That was the only advantage I had, and I used it for 2.5 years to build the thing that would end them. Reed's voice came from the front, flat and focused. Walker, Vehicle 2 back has been with us since mile 4. Walker did not turn around. Speed, done, matching exactly, not gaining, not dropping. That's the tell. A random vehicle doesn't match your speed through 2-lane changes in a traffic light that we ran yellow. Options. I know a split about a mile ahead. 2-lane east runs into a state forest service road. If I take it at speed, a tail has to commit immediately or lose us. No time to call it in and wait for instructions. Take it, Walker said. Reed took it. Hard left, no signal, maximum acceleration through the turn. Hayes grabbed the door handle with one hand and kept the laptop steady with the other without being asked. Emily did not move at all, which told Walker everything about how many times she had been in a vehicle that made exactly this kind of maneuver. The vehicle behind them did not follow. Walker watched through the rear window until he was certain. Then he faced forward. The absence of a tail would have been a relief. It was not, because Emily was already looking at him with an expression that told him she had reached the same conclusion he had, that a tail dropping off cleanly meant one of two things, and neither of them was good. Either the tail had recognized they were burned and pulled back to avoid being identified, or they had already completed their purpose, which was to confirm the direction of travel and pass that information forward to whatever was being positioned ahead. How far to your location? Walker asked Emily. 4 hours at this speed, she said. Less if we can avoid the main roads. Reed, Walker said. Already on it, Reed said, and the vehicle turned north onto a route that Walker did not recognize, which was exactly the point. Reed had been driving in situations like this long enough to maintain a mental library of secondary routes across a significant portion of the Pacific Northwest, the kind of knowledge that cannot be GPS navigated and cannot be acquired quickly, and that makes a certain kind of person extremely valuable in exactly these moments. They drove. Hayes worked through the files in the systematic way that was specific to him, not sequentially but structurally, building a map of the evidence architecture before examining individual documents, understanding how the pieces connected before evaluating any single piece in isolation. Walker watched him work and thought about what Emily had said about the financial records. 41 individuals, 6 agencies, 2 foreign intelligence services, 1 financial institution. The scope of it was large enough to be almost abstract, the way very large numbers become abstract when the human brain cannot hold them in a concrete way. About 40 minutes into the drive, Hayes made a sound, not a word, just a sound, the small, involuntary vocalization of a person who has seen something unexpected in data they thought they understood. Walker leaned forward. What? He said. Mission 8, Hayes said. His voice had changed registers in a way that was subtle enough that someone who did not know him would not notice it. Walker noticed it. The target was a man named Thomas Vega, a journalist. Yes, Emily said from the back. The authorization document on this one is different from the others. Hayes was looking at the screen with the particular focus of someone trying to make absolutely certain of what they are seeing. The other authorizations have 3 signatories. Blackwood, Carmichael, Park. This one has 4. The vehicle was completely quiet. Even the road noise seemed to recede. The 4th name, Emily said. Her voice was controlled in the way that things are controlled when control is the result of significant effort rather than the absence of feeling. Read it to me. Hayes read it, and for the first time since Reed had touched her shoulder on that piece of wreckage in the North Pacific for the first time, through the medical examination and the module transfer and the firefight in the corridor, and everything that had followed, Emily Carter closed her eyes. Not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4. But Walker saw it, and he saw what came immediately after it, which was the specific quality of stillness that moves through a person's body when they receive confirmation of something they have been trying not to fully believe. The slight drop of the shoulders, the long breath taken through the nose, the moment where the last remaining hope that you were wrong about something dissolves and what is left is just the clean, terrible clarity of knowing. You already suspected, Walker said, not as an accusation, as the simple recognition of what he had just witnessed. I suspected, she confirmed. Her eyes were open again. That cold blue focus back in place. I found a financial trail 8 months ago that suggested the connection, but the trail had 2 gaps that I could not close without access to documentation I didn't have. I didn't know. I couldn't let myself act on something I didn't know. She paused. Now I know. Walker did not ask the name. Hayes had read it quietly enough that only he and Emily had heard it with complete clarity, and Walker had a practice about certain categories of information. You carry only what you need to carry until the moment comes when you need to carry more. He had heard it. He had recognized it. He filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things that required extremely careful handling, and he would come back to it when the time was right. How many of the 17 missions had what you'd classify as non-legitimate targets? Hayes asked. He was already back to work because Hayes processed emotion by converting it into productive action, and everyone who worked with him understood this and respected it. 6, Emily said. The first 4 years were genuine operations. I have reviewed the intelligence assessments for missions, 1 through 4 extensively, and the threat justifications hold up under scrutiny. Those were real cases, real threats, legitimate work. Mission 5 is where I first noticed inconsistencies in the target package. Mission 7 is where the profile of the target shifted in a way I could not rationalize within the stated parameters. By Mission 9, the pattern was clear enough that I could no longer pretend otherwise. Clear meaning what exactly? Reed asked from the front. His voice was even, but Walker could hear the thing underneath it. The thing that happens to people when they learn that the infrastructure they have given their professional lives to trusting contains something they were not prepared for. Clear meaning the targets were not threats, Emily said. They were inconveniences. Specifically, they were people who possessed information that Blackwood's organization needed to suppress before it reached anyone with the authority to act on it. Not weapons developers, not foreign agents, not people who had harmed or planned to harm anyone. She looked at the rifle across her knees. A pharmaceutical researcher who had documented falsified clinical trial data tied to a drug that Meridian had a financial stake in. A structural engineer who had discovered a critical failure in a weapons guidance system that Blackwood had under contract with 3 allied governments, a failure that would have voided the contract and triggered liability claims in the hundreds of millions. A State Department analyst who had paper documentation of payments made to foreign procurement officials in exchange for contract approvals. A financial investigator from the SEC who had traced offshore accounts connected to Meridian's off-book revenue. Hayes had stopped typing again. He did it the way people stop what they are doing when the thing they are hearing is too significant to absorb while doing anything else simultaneously. These are the people, Walker said. These are the people, Emily confirmed. None of them were combatants. None of them were threats to national security in any legitimate sense of that phrase. They were citizens doing their jobs correctly, finding things that were real and that mattered. And then they were identified as problems, and I was the solution. She said it without flinching, without any attempt to distance herself from the weight of it. I need you to understand that I am not telling you this to position myself as a victim of the program. I made choices. I carried out operations. I did not ask the questions I should have asked early enough. She looked at Walker directly. I am telling you this because the full picture of what is in that module requires you to understand what it was used for. Walker held her gaze. I understand. Do you? She said, not aggressive, genuinely asking. I understand that you are telling me everything, he said. Not the version that makes you look best, everything. And I understand what that costs. He paused. Yes, I understand. Something in Emily's face shifted barely perceptible. The kind of shift that you only catch if you are watching very carefully. Like a door that opened a fraction of an inch and then returned to where it had been. Walker caught it. He did not say anything about it. Reed spoke from the front. Walker, I want to flag something. He kept his eyes on the road. We have been in this vehicle for 40 minutes with information that, if I am following correctly, connects to people at the director level of the national intelligence infrastructure. I want to make sure we are thinking about the next 12 hours correctly, because the moment we make contact with a prosecutor, any prosecutor, the situation changes permanently. There is no version of that contact that allows us to step back from it. I know, Walker said. I want to know that you know, Reed said, because what I'm hearing from these files suggests that the people we would be stepping against have significant influence over exactly the kinds of official processes that would normally be used to protect us while we do it. That's why the location matters, Emily said, and why the prosecutor matters, and why the evidence chain matters. She looked at the back of Reed's head. I have been thinking about this longer than any of you. Every concern you're raising right now is a concern I raised and worked through and built contingencies for. I am not asking you to walk into this blind. I am asking you to walk into it with the best prepared case that the circumstances allow. Reed was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said, then let's make sure we get there. Another hour passed. Hayes worked continuously. Walker watched the road. Emily sat still with the rifle and said nothing, which was not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone who understood when silence was the most useful contribution they could make. Then Hayes said, "Emily, the financial records. I'm into the first layer." He turned the laptop around slowly. The document on the screen was a wire transfer record. The amount was significant enough that Walker read it twice. The originating account was in the Cayman Islands, routed through two intermediary institutions in Zurich and Singapore, before arriving at a domestic trust account. The domestic trust account was registered to a holding company incorporated in Delaware. The holding company had a beneficial owner listed on the original trust formation documents, which Emily had apparently obtained from a source Walker could not yet identify. A name, not Blackwood, not Carmichael, not Park. A name Walker recognized. A name that anyone who had watched a news broadcast in the last 10 years would recognize. A name that belonged to a category of person so far above the level of anyone Walker had ever encountered professionally that his first involuntary response was to check whether he had misread it. He had not misread it. Hayes looked at Walker. Walker looked at Emily. Emily looked at the screen for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of water that has been very cold for a very long time, not frozen but right at the boundary. "That account received 11 payments over 6 years," she said, "each time to coincide with a contract renewal or a program expansion. Each routed through the same 3 intermediary institutions. Each originated from the same offshore structure." She looked from the screen. "I found the first evidence of this transaction pattern 14 months ago. I spent 6 months verifying it independently before I was willing to believe what I was looking at." "Why didn't you include this in the primary file structure?" Walker asked. "Because I needed it to be the last thing anyone looked at," she said. "Not because it's the weakest piece of evidence, because it's the strongest. And you always hold your strongest evidence until the people reviewing the case are already convinced by everything else. You don't lead with the thing that is hardest to believe. You build to it." She looked at Hayes. "Is the documentation complete enough to stand on its own?" Hayes looked at the screen for a long time, longer than he usually took to assess anything. When he turned back, his expression was the careful expression of a man who is not willing to overstate something this significant, but who also cannot in good conscience understate it. "If I had to stand in front of a federal judge right now and characterize what I'm looking at," he said, "I would say the documentation is comprehensive, the transaction trail is technically unambiguous, and the timing correlations are not coincidental." He paused. "It would hold." Emily nodded once. Walker closed the laptop gently. He looked at the road ahead. He looked at the dark outside the windows. He looked at the encrypted drive in Hayes's pocket and thought about the 41 names in the financial records and the one name that changed the weight of everything else. And he understood something clearly and completely for the first time since this morning, since the moment he had looked at a thermal display over the North Pacific and seen a heat signature that should not have been there. This was not a mission. It was not an operation with defined parameters and an endpoint and a chain of command that would review the results. This was something that did not have a category in his 22 years of experience. This was a woman who had survived being built into a weapon, who had spent years turning that weapon into evidence, who had survived 3 days in the ocean to deliver that evidence to people capable of doing something with it, and who was now sitting in a vehicle next to him with a rifle across her knees in the patience of someone who has been preparing for this specific moment for a very long time. I thought about Nathan Brooks. He thought about what it meant to bring this case to a federal prosecutor when the case contained the financial records of people at the absolute apex of American institutional power. He thought about what Brooks would need to proceed, what protection he would need, what the process would look like, and how it would have to be structured to survive the pressure that would immediately be applied against it the moment its existence became known. I thought about Reed's point. There was no stepping back from the contact. Once they made it, the situation became permanent and irreversible. Walker had spent his career making irreversible decisions. He had made them correctly more often than not. He believed he was capable of making this one correctly too. But he also understood sitting in that vehicle on that dark road that correctly was going to require everything he had. Every skill, every relationship, every piece of credibility he had built over 2 decades of service. He was going to spend all of it on this, and it was still going to be close. Emily, he said, yes. When we reach the location after Hayes completes the verification, I'm going to need you to walk me through every operational detail of how you built this case. Not for the files, for me personally. He held her gaze. Because when I talk to Brooks, I need to be able to answer every question he asks without hesitation. I need to know this the way you know it. Emily looked at him steadily. That will take most of the night. Then we start when we arrive, and we work until it's done, Walker said. She looked at him for a moment longer. That same quality he had noticed before the assessment, the weighing of something. Except this time when it resolved differently. Not the professional evaluation of a potential threat, something that was tentative and careful, and underneath all of that, something that Walker recognized as the very early stages of trust being extended by someone who had extremely good reasons not to extend it to anyone. Okay, she said. Outside, the road was dark and empty in both directions. In Hayes's pocket, the encrypted drive held 41 names and 15 years of evidence, and one financial record that was going to change everything, assuming they could get it to the right person before the people. It implicated finished recalculating and sent something more than second-tier contractors. Walker was not going to let that happen. He did not say it out loud because it was not the kind of thing that needed to be said out loud. It was just true. And Emily Carter, who had spent 12 years learning to tell the difference between people who meant what they said and people who only performed meaning. Emily Carter looked at him one more time and then looked at the road ahead, and something in the way she held her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly. Just a fraction of the tension she had been carrying since the moment Reed had touched her shoulder in the North Pacific. Not gone, not even close to gone, but different. Like a door held shut by the force of absolute necessity that had finally found something worth opening toward. They arrived at the location at 2:17 in the morning. It was a property Emily had accessed through 6 layers of separation, a detail Walker did not ask her to elaborate on, and that she did not volunteer because both of them understood that some information is safer when it stays in exactly one person's head. What mattered was that the place was clean. No surveillance. No connection to anything in Meridian's operational database. No reason for anyone to look at it twice. Reed did a perimeter check before any of them got out of the vehicle. He was gone for 11 minutes and came back with nothing to report, which was the best possible result, in which Walker still did not fully trust because the absence of something visible had stopped being the same as the absence of something real the moment he had seen those 2 contractors in the corridor. Hayes set up immediately. Power from the generator. Clean connection through the satellite router Emily had pre-configured. He had the encrypted drive connected and all 3 backup copies syncing within 4 minutes of sitting down, which was a personal record that nobody commented on because there was no time to comment on anything that was not immediately necessary. Emily set the rifle on the table in the center of the room. Not put it away, set it down in the way that a person sets down something they intend to pick back up within reach in a position where it could be retrieved in under 2 seconds. Then she sat across from Walker and she began. She began with Douglas Carmichael, not because Carmichael was the beginning. He was not. The program had existed before Carmichael recruited Emily, before he even held his current position. But because Carmichael was the beginning of her understanding, and Walker had asked her to walk him through the case the way she knew it, which meant starting where her knowledge started and building forward from there. He came to my college in October of my junior year, she said. I was 20 years old. He presented as a government talent evaluator, the kind of recruiter who visits technical universities looking for people with specific cognitive profiles. I had scored in the top fraction of a percent on 3 separate assessments that I now understand were selection instruments. She paused. He told me I had a gift for spatial reasoning pattern recognition and something he called dynamic threat assessment. He told me those skills were needed in a program that protected national security at a level most people never knew existed. She looked at her hands on the table. He was right about the skills. Everything else he told me was constructed specifically to make me say yes. Walker listened without interrupting. He had learned in 2 decades of command that the most important thing you can do when someone is telling you something true and difficult is to be completely still. Not to nod too much. Not to ask questions before the natural pause. Just to receive it fully so the person telling it knows it is being received. The first 2 years were training, Emily continued. Physical, technical, psychological. They had facilities I still cannot fully describe within the classification framework of anything I understand, which tells me the program operated outside standard classification architecture entirely. I trained with other recruits, 6 of us initially. By the end of the second year, there were 3. Walker kept his expression neutral. What happened to the other 3? 2 washed out through the standard evaluation process, and she said, the third one, her name was Julia Reyes. She asked the wrong question during a mission briefing in month 19. She asked why a specific target had been elevated to priority status when the intelligence file she had been given contained no threat assessment justification. Emily looked at the table. I never saw her again. I was told she had been transferred to a different program track. I believed that for 4 years. And then, Walker asked? And then I found her name in the financial records, Emily said quietly, in a payments column, under a category labeled Asset Resolution. The room was completely still. Reed, who had been standing near the door, moved, just 1 step unconscious, the kind of physical response that the body makes when the mind hears something that requires more space to process than is currently available. Hayes did not look up from the laptop, but his typing stopped. Walker absorbed it. He absorbed it the way you absorb information that changes the topology of what you thought you were dealing with, not dramatically, not with visible reaction, but with the specific internal adjustment of a person recalibrating every calculation they have made up to that point. Emily, he said carefully, I need to ask you something directly. Yes. The people we're dealing with, the ones who sent the contractors tonight, do they know exactly what is on that module, or do they know what might be on it? She considered the question. They know what I built, she said. They discovered the recording system approximately 3 months before I went into the water. They ran a technical analysis of the rifle and identified the module architecture. What they could not determine what the encryption was specifically designed to prevent was the content. They know the module exists. They know it contains mission data. They do not know about the financial records. She paused. The financial layer was added 18 months ago through a secondary encryption that does not appear in the visible module architecture. To the technical analysis they ran, it looks like unused memory space. Hayes finally looked up. So they sent contractors tonight based on the assumption that the module contains mission files and authorization documents. Yes, Emily said. They don't know about the financial records. Not yet. Which means, Hayes said slowly, that the moment they get access to a technical analysis of what we actually transferred, if they have anyone inside the standard intelligence surveillance architecture, the threat level upgrades immediately. Significantly, Emily confirmed. Walker looked at the time, 2:41 in the morning. They had been at the location for 24 minutes. How long before they recalibrate? He asked Emily. Not Hayes, Emily, because Emily understood the operational psychology of the people running this in a way that Hayes, for all his technical brilliance, simply could not. They already know the module transfer happened, she said. The contractors who were at the facility, the one who retreated from the roof, he transmitted a status report before he withdrew. That report told them the module had been accessed, that there were 4 of us, and that we had left the facility in a vehicle. They have been working on the recalculation since approximately 90 minutes ago. She looked at Walker steadily. They will not send contractors next time. What will they send? Program personnel, she said. First tier, people who know what the module contains and who understand exactly what is at stake. How many first-tier personnel does the program have? Operationally active. When I left, there were 4 individuals besides myself, she said. I don't know how many they've recruited in the 8 months since, but 4 trained specifically for this kind of work, with full program knowledge and full operational authorization. She paused. They are very good, Commander. Better than the contractors. Better in some respects than your team. Reed made a sound that was not quite a laugh. No offense taken, he said dryly. None intended, Emily said, and she meant it, which was somehow more unsettling than if she had been trying to provoke a reaction. She was simply stating a fact the way she stated all facts directly, without ornamentation, without apology. Walker stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, not looking at anything outside, just using the physical movement to run through the options in sequence. They were limited. That was fine. Limited options were easier to evaluate than many options, and Walker had always been better at making decisions under constraint than under abundance. We accelerate the timeline, he said, turning back. Hayes, I need the verification completed before dawn. What do you need from me to make that happen? Nothing, Hayes said. He was already typing again. I'm in the financial layer now. Emily, I need you here. Emily moved to the chair beside Hayes without hesitation. What followed was 3 hours of the most technically dense conversation Walker had ever witnessed, Hayes working through the financial architecture of the evidence with the methodical precision of an engineer, stress testing a structure, and Emily answering every question with the fluency of someone who had spent 14 months living inside this specific body of information. Walker sat across the table and listened, and occasionally asked a clarifying question, and mostly just tracked the shape of what was emerging. It was substantial. That was the only word adequate to what was in those files. The transaction architecture was intricate enough to have required significant legal and financial expertise to construct, which told Walker something about the resources available to the people who built it. But it was also documented with the kind of thoroughness that happens when multiple parties to an illegal arrangement each need their own paper trail for leverage against the others. The very thing that made the network function, the mutual accountability of participants who did not entirely trust each other, had generated the evidence that could destroy it. At 4:23 in the morning, Hayes leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, "It's complete." Walker looked at him. "Complete meaning." "Complete meaning, I have verified every document in this module against every available independent data source," Hayes said. "The mission files are authentic. The authorization signatures are authentic. The financial transaction records are authentic and complete with a chain of custody that traces every payment from origin to destination without interruption." He paused. "And the evidence is internally consistent in a way that cannot be manufactured. You cannot fake this level of cross-referencing across independent systems without leaving artifacts that any competent technical analyst would identify immediately." Walker looked at Emily. She was looking at Hayes with an expression Walker had not seen on her face before. It took him a moment to identify it because it was so different from the controlled assessed quality of everything she had shown him up to this point. It was relief. Not triumph, not vindication, just relief, the specific bone-deep relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just learned for the first time that the weight of it is finally being shared by someone capable of holding it. She looked away almost immediately, but Walker had seen it. "Then we contact Brooks," Walker said. "It's 4:30 in the morning," Reed pointed out. "I know what time it is," Walker said. He picked up the encrypted satellite phone, the one he had brought from the vehicle, the one that was not connected to any standard military communication infrastructure, and he dialed a number he had memorized 3 years ago and never used. Nathan Brooks answered on the second ring. Not the groggy, disoriented answer of a man woken from deep sleep. The immediate alert answer of a man who had been awake. "Walker," Brooks said. Walker stopped. "You know who this is?" "I've been expecting a call from someone," Brooks said. "I wasn't certain who, but yes, I know who you are, Commander." A pause. "I know why you're calling." Walker looked at Emily across the table. She was watching him with that absolute attention she brought to everything, taking in every word on both sides of the conversation with the full processing capacity of someone for whom listening was a trained skill. "How?" Walker said. "Because 3 days ago, a woman disappeared from the North Pacific," Brooks said. "And 2 days ago, I received an encrypted file through a delivery mechanism I did not understand and cannot fully trace, containing a single document. A letter." Another pause. "Addressed to me, explaining that if I received it, the person who wrote it was either dead or had been recovered by people she trusted, and that in either case someone would call." Walker's hand tightened slightly on the phone. He looked at Emily. She was already looking at him. "You sent him a letter," Walker said, "not to Brooks, to Emily." 14 months ago, she said quietly. "A contingency. If the module was never recovered, the letter would give him enough context to begin an independent investigation. Not the full evidence, not enough to expose anyone without the files, but enough to know where to look and what questions to ask." She held his gaze. "I told you I had been building the contingencies for a long time." Walker brought the phone back to his ear. "Brooks." "I'm here," Brooks said. "We have the complete evidence package, verified, authenticated, ready for transfer." Walker paused. You need to understand the scope of what we're bringing you before we go further. Tell me, Walker told him. Not everything, the name from the financial records. Not yet, not over a phone line, even an encrypted one, but enough. The mission files, the authorization signatures, the financial transaction architecture, the number of individuals implicated, the agencies connected. Brooks was quiet for a long time after Walker finished. Long enough that Walker checked the phone to make sure the connection was still active. Commander Brooks said finally, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." "What you are describing is not a case," Brooks said. "What you are describing is a structural failure at the institutional level of the national security apparatus. Cases have defendants and evidence in procedural frameworks in appellate processes. What you're describing is something that if it goes through standard federal channels in an uncontrolled way, will be dismantled before it reaches an indictment." He paused. "I've been here before. I know exactly how this gets killed. I know who makes the calls and to whom and in what order and how long it takes." Another pause, heavier this time. "I need to tell you something that I have not told anyone outside of one conversation with my wife 3 years ago." Walker waited. "The undersecretary case," Brooks said. "The one I rerouted through the state AG when the federal investigation was shut down. The reason it was shut down was not insufficient evidence. The official reason was insufficient evidence. The real reason was a phone call made to my supervisor from someone at ODNI who told him that continuing the investigation would compromise active intelligence operations." Brooks's voice was steady, but carried something underneath it, the particular quality of controlled anger that belongs to people who are very good at keeping their feelings contained and who have been containing this specific feeling for a long time. "I have been waiting 3 years for the context that would explain that phone call. I think you just gave it to me." Walker absorbed that. Hayes was looking at him from across the table. Reed had moved closer to the phone without appearing to. Emily sat completely still. "What do we do?" Walker asked. "You come to me," Brooks said, "not to my office, not to any federal facility. I have a location, a private property in my name that has no connection to my professional activities. You bring the evidence physically, not transmitted, not uploaded, not sent through any digital channel. Physical media in your hands, in my presence." He paused. "And I need it before this business day begins. Once the standard workday starts and the right people start making the right calls, the window begins closing." Walker looked at the time, 4:47 in the morning. "How far are you from Seattle?" he asked Brooks. 4 hours, Brooks said. Walker did the math. It was tight. It was very tight. "We'll be there." He ended the call. He looked at the table, at Hayes, at Reed, at Emily, and he saw in all three of them the same thing, which was the look of people who understand that the situation they are in has just permanently clarified, that the path forward has just narrowed to a single lane, and that single lane required moving immediately. "We leave in 10 minutes, Walker said. I had barely finished the sentence when Reed's phone buzzed. Reed looked at it. His expression did not change, which with Reed was the most alarming possible response, because Reed's face moved constantly in normal situations and went completely flat when something was seriously wrong. "Walker," Reed said. "What?" "My guy at Whidbey," Reed said. "The one I trust." He held up the phone. "He just sent me a 3-word message." Walker looked at the message. 3 words. "They found you." The next 4 seconds were the longest Walker had experienced in recent memory. Not because nothing happened in them, because everything that needed to be decided was decided in them, in the compressed internal space where experienced operators make the kinds of choices that cannot be unmade. "How?" Emily said. She was already on her feet, already reaching for the rifle, already moving through the space in the specific way that she moved. When she shifted from analysis mode to operational mode, the transition was almost invisible, except for the quality of attention in her eyes, which sharpened from focused to absolute. "The vehicle," Reed said. "They must have tagged it at the facility. Passive tracker low emission wouldn't show on a standard sweep." He looked at Walker. "My sweep wasn't deep enough." "It wasn't your fault," Walker said. And he meant it, but he did not spend more than a second on it because fault was not the relevant variable. "Time to contact." Reed looked at the phone again, then toward the door, the way he always did when he was calculating distances in real space rather than on a screen. 20 minutes, maybe less if they're moving fast. They're moving fast, Emily said. She was checking the rifle with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom the check sequence has been performed so many times it requires no conscious attention. They won't come in quiet this time. They know the module has been accessed. They know what we have. The calculation has changed. How many? Walker asked her. All of them, she said. Every first-tier asset they have available. This is not a retrieval anymore. She looked at him directly. This is a termination order. For all of us. Walker processed that without visible reaction. He turned to Hayes. The drive. Already copying the last backup, Hayes said. His voice was completely level, which Walker recognized as the sound of Hayes operating at maximum capacity under maximum pressure. 60 seconds. You have 45, Walker said. He moved to Reed. Secondary exit. North side, Reed said, leads to a service road. If we move in the next 10 minutes, we have a route that does not intersect with the approach they would use from the main access point. How do you know which approach they'll use? Because it's the one I would use, Reed said simply. Walker looked at Emily. She was looking at the door, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the specific calibrated attention of someone who is assessing an approach vector and planning a response to it. Emily, Walker said. She looked at him. You know these people, he said. Better than we do. If they breach this location before we're clear, what does that look like? She thought for exactly the time she needed to think, and not 1 second longer. They'll try to separate us first, isolate the person carrying the drive, then the person with the most operational knowledge of the evidence structure. She paused. That's me. I'm the primary target. I always have been. She looked at Hayes. But the drive is the secondary target. Without the drive, I am the only complete version of this evidence that exists, which means you and the drive do not travel together, Walker said. She understood immediately. Reed takes the drive, she said. Different vehicle, different route. You and I draw the primary attention. She held his gaze. You understand what I'm suggesting? I understand exactly what you're suggesting, Walker said. And I'm not doing it. Walker, we move together, he said. We do not split the team. We do not separate the evidence from the person who can authenticate it in front of a prosecutor. He picked up his kitten, looked at her with an expression that was not open to further discussion. We move fast enough that it doesn't matter. For a moment, Emily looked at him with something that was equal parts frustration and something else, something she was not yet prepared to name, but that was connected to the small opening in the door. He had noticed earlier the infinitesimal shift in the way she held herself when she was around him. Hayes, Walker said. Done, Hayes said. He had the drive in his pocket and the laptop under his arm, and he was already standing. Reed was already at the north exit. They moved. The next 12 minutes were the kind that Walker would never fully be able to reconstruct into brief because they happened in the sensory compression of maximum operational stress movement and sound and the particular heightened physical awareness of a person whose body has accepted that the situation is real and has redirected every available single goal of surviving it. Reed navigated the service road with the lights off for the first half mile using terrain knowledge and the faint pre-dawn light that was just beginning to separate the horizon from the sky above it. Hayes sat in the back with the drive in his jacket pocket and both hands braced, saying nothing. Emily was in the front passenger seat, the rifle in her lap, watching the mirrors and the road ahead simultaneously. Walker was watching all of them. At the 4-minute mark, they heard it behind them, and to the south, the sound that carried through the pre-dawn quiet. Not gunfire, not yet. The sound of vehicles moving fast over a road that was not designed for that speed. Multiple vehicles. The sound of people who have stopped caring about being heard because they believe speed matters more than stealth at this stage of the operation. They found the location, Reed said, not panicked, reporting. How far behind, Walker asked. 2 minutes, maybe less. Can we reach the main route before they reach us? Reed looked at the road ahead. He made the calculation the way Reed always made calculations, not with visible deliberation, but with the clean speed of someone whose decision architecture has been built over years of exactly these moments. Yes, he said, but not with margin. We don't need margin, Walker said. We need enough. What happened next happened at speed, at the specific speed of a vehicle being driven by someone who knows the difference between fast and reckless and who is operating right at that boundary with total precision. The service road met the main road at an angle that required a hard right, and Reed took it without slowing, and the vehicle's rear end moved through the turn and came back in line in one continuous controlled motion that Hayes absorbed with his whole body without making a sound. Behind them, the pursuing vehicles reached the service road. They were on the main route now. Public road. Other traffic beginning to appear as the pre-dawn logistics movement that belongs to the early hours of any given day. Delivery vehicles, overnight shift workers, heading home, the particular population of people who exist in the world before most of the world is awake. Reed moved the vehicle into that traffic with the specific deliberateness of someone who understands that visibility is now protection rather than liability. You cannot execute a termination order on a public road and moving traffic without consequences that expand the situation beyond what even well-resourced private operators want to manage. The pursuing vehicles slowed behind them, not stopped, slowed. They're holding distance, Reed reported. They're following, Emily said. She was watching the mirrors, waiting for an opportunity, a stop, a red light, a moment where the public environment gives them enough concealment to move. Then we don't stop, Walker said. Walker, Hayes said from the back. His voice had changed, not fear. Hayes did not sound afraid. He sounded the way he sounded when he found something significant in data, that specific register of a man who has just seen something he did not expect. I'm looking at the last file structure on the drive. There's a partition I didn't see in the initial transfer. Walker turned. What partition? A deeper archive, Hayes said. He was looking at the laptop screen, which he had somehow opened and connected to the drive while in a moving vehicle during an active pursuit because Hayes was Hayes, and this was apparently what Hayes did. Emily, did you know about a secondary partition in the module? Emily did not turn from the mirrors. Yes, she said. You didn't mention it. I mentioned it to Walker, she said. I told him there were files he hadn't seen yet. Walker looked at Hayes. What's in it? Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then more names, more mission files. He looked up from the screen. Emily, how many operations did the program run before you were recruited? I don't know the exact number, she said. I know it was active for at least 3 years before I was brought in. 11 years of operations, Hayes said. That's what's in here, the program archive going back to its founding. Every mission, every authorization, every financial transfer, not just the 17 you were part of. He looked at Walker. There are 63 missions in this archive. 63. The vehicle was quiet. Walker looked at Emily. She was still watching the mirrors. Her profile was completely still. But he could see the line of her jaw and the specific quality of tension in it. The tension of someone who is hearing something they prepared themselves to hear, but that hits differently than preparation accounts for. You knew it was in there, Walker said. I suspected, she said. I knew the program had pre-existing records. I knew when I was recruited that I was not the first. I built the module to accept any data format that Meridian's archival system used specifically because I hoped that at some point I would be able to access the pre-existing archive. She paused. 3 months before I went into the water, I got access to a terminal that I was not supposed to have access to for long enough to initiate a transfer. I didn't know how much came through before the connection was severed. 63 missions came through, Hayes said quietly. 63. Walker said nothing. He looked at the road ahead and at the vehicles behind them in the mirror, and at the drive in Hayes' hands, and at Emily Carter, sitting in the front seat of a vehicle she had not driven and did not control on a road that was taking her toward a prosecutor she had never met, with evidence that was larger and deeper and more consequential than even he had understood 90 minutes ago. And he thought about Richard Blackwood signing that order at his desk on a Tuesday morning. 4 words, a steady hand, the casual arithmetic of a man who believed that the ocean was a perfect solution to the problem of a person who knew too much. 63 missions, 63. And Blackwood was dead, which meant the order had come from someone else this time. From the 41 names in the financial records. From the 4th signature on the Mission 8 authorization document. From somewhere inside the infrastructure of power that Emily had spent 12 years inside and 8 months trying to dismantle, and 3 days in the North Pacific refusing to let kill her. Brooks, Walker said. He picked up the satellite phone. We're going to need him to move the meeting point. I already sent him the new location, Emily said. Walker stared at her. She glanced at him sideways. While you were talking to Hayes, she said, I have a secondary encrypted channel that routes through the same residential satellite account as the safe house. I reached out to Brooks directly, with updated coordinates that do not connect to our current route. You have a direct line to Brooks, Walker said. I built one 14 months ago, she said. When I sent the letter, a one-way channel that he could activate if he chose to. He activated it 6 hours after he received the letter. She looked back at the mirrors. He's been reachable for 14 months. I just didn't have anything to tell him that was ready yet. Reed made a sound from the driver's seat that was the specific sound of a person recalibrating their understanding of someone they thought they had already fully assessed. Emily, that he said, how many contingencies do you actually have? She thought about it seriously. Enough, she said. And for the first time, the absolute first time since Marcus Reed had touched her shoulder on a broken piece of deck panel in the North Pacific Ocean, Emily Carter almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Behind them, the pursuing vehicles held their distance. Ahead, the road ran toward a horizon that was beginning to show the first gray line of a dawn that was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. In Hayes's hands, 63 missions and 15 years of institutional corruption, and one name that was going to change everything, sat on a drive smaller than a thumb, encrypted and verified, and finally after everything ready to be seen. Walker looked at the road. I thought we are going to make it. He did not say it out loud because 22 years had taught him that saying things like that out loud was exactly the kind of thing that turned out to be wrong. But he thought it. And beside him, Emily Carter watched the mirrors with those cold blue eyes and counted the distance between them and the vehicles behind them, and calculated with the specific precision of a woman who had been trained to calculate everything and who had survived everything the calculation had thrown at her, exactly how much further they needed to go. They reached Nathan Brooks at 6:14 in the morning. The location Emily had transmitted was a private property 40 minutes outside the city, a place registered in Brooks's wife's maiden name, the kind of detail that told Walker something important about how long Brooks had been preparing for exactly this kind of meeting. Not days, not weeks. The man had been building exits for years the way certain people do when they work close enough to institutional power to understand what that power does to people it considers inconvenient. Brooks was already there when they arrived, standing outside, no jacket despite the cold coffee in one hand and a phone in the other that he pocketed the moment their vehicle came into view. He was taller than Walker had expected from news photographs, thinner. He had the specific look of a man who had been awake for a long time and had long since stopped noticing it. He looked at the vehicle. He looked at Walker when Walker got out. He looked at Reed and Hayes, and then he looked at Emily, and something passed across his face that was not surprise. He had known she was alive. He had been told she was alive, but was something more complicated than surprise. The look of a man who has been reading about a person for 14 months through a series of encrypted messages and is now seeing that person standing in front of him for the first time and finding that she is both exactly and nothing like what he had imagined. Emily Carter, he said. Mr. Brooks, she said. You're shorter than I expected, he said. Something that might have been the beginning of a real smile crossed her face and disappeared. People say that. Brooks looked at Walker. Come inside, he said. We have approximately 2 hours before this location becomes compromised through standard surveillance architecture, and I want every minute of that. They went inside. Brooks had a table set up, and not the casual table of a man hosting unexpected guests, but the deliberate table of a man who had been preparing for a specific kind of meeting. Legal pads, a recording device that he identified immediately and asked permission to use and waited for confirmation from each person in the room before activating. A laptop connected to a printer that Walker assumed was not networked to anything external. The drive, Brooks said, looking at Hayes. Hayes looked at Walker. Walker nodded. Hayes set the drive on the table. Brooks looked at it for a moment. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way certain people look at things that they understand to be significant in a way that exceeds their physical reality. The way you look at a letter from someone you thought was dead, or a document that contains the name of someone you trusted. Before we begin, Brooks said, I need to establish something clearly for the record. He looked at each of them in turn. I am a federal prosecutor. What I am doing right now exists in a legal space that is not entirely comfortable. The formal thing would be to bring this to my office to initiate a standard evidentiary intake process to involve my supervisor and the relevant investigative agencies. He paused. The reason I am not doing that is that the relevant investigative agencies are represented in the files on that drive. You understand what that means for the standard process. It means the standard process gets the case killed before it starts, Walker said. It means the standard process gets the case killed before it starts, Brooks confirmed, which means we are doing this differently. We are doing this through a parallel track, one that I have used once before that I know works and that I know how to protect. He looked at Emily. The letter you sent me 14 months ago. You described a parallel evidentiary structure. Multiple simultaneous filings across jurisdictions with independent verification chains that cannot all be suppressed simultaneously because they do not pass through any single point of control. Yes, Emily said, you built that structure already. Over the course of 8 months, she said, the primary package goes to you. There are 4 secondary packages, independent journalists with specific documentation of the financial layer, only sufficient to begin public inquiry, but not sufficient to identify all individuals or compromise the criminal case. A 5th package goes to an allied foreign intelligence service through a back channel that I established 18 months ago, and that has no connection to any U.S. intelligence network. Brooks was quiet for a moment. Which service? Emily told him. Brooks absorbed that. He wrote something on his legal pad. And these packages are held where? In locations connected to timer mechanisms, Emily said. If I do not send a specific encrypted signal every 72 hours, the packages release automatically to their recipients. The room was quiet. Walker had known about the contingencies. He had not known about the timer mechanism. He looked at Emily and understood in the specific way you understand things about people when you have spent an intense and compressed period of time with them, that she had not told him about this earlier because she had needed to tell Brooks about it first in this room on the record. Not because she did not trust Walker, because the architecture of what she had built required that certain information be delivered in a specific sequence to specific people, and she had been managing that sequence with the same precision she brought to everything else. Emily to Brooks said, and his voice had changed not dramatically but enough, I need to ask you something that is not about the evidence. She looked at him. Are you all right? He said. The question landed in the room differently than anything else that had been said in it. Not clinically, not procedurally, just the plain human question of a person asking another person whether the weight they have been carrying has broken them or whether they are still intact underneath it. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Ask me again in 6 months, she said. Brooks nodded slowly. He picked up the drive. Then let's get to work. What followed was the most compressed, inconsequential 2 hours Walker had ever spent in a room. Brooks moved through the evidence with the speed of someone who had been anticipating this material for over a year and who had spent that year building the analytical framework to receive it. He asked questions that were precise and technical, and that Emily answered with the same precision and technicality. Hayes translated when the questions required understanding of the module's technical architecture. Reed stood near the door and said almost nothing and watched every window. At the 40-minute mark, Brooks reached the authorization documents. He went through them methodically, mission by mission, signature by signature. When he reached mission 8, the one with 4 signatories instead of 3, he stopped. He read the 4th name. He set the document down carefully the way you set down something fragile. He looked at Emily. You verified this independently, he said. 3 times, she said, across 3 separate documentation sources that do not share a common origin. The financial records support it. The financial records establish it independently, she said. The authorization document proves intent. The financial records prove benefit. Together, they establish a complete picture of both participation and motivation. Brooks picked up his pen. He wrote something on the legal pad. He underlined it twice. He set the pen down. How long have you known? 14 months since I found the financial trail, Emily said. 8 months since I verified it sufficiently to be certain. 8 months, Brooks said quietly, almost to himself. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. You carried this for 8 months alone. Yes. After everything else you had already been carrying. Yes. Brooks was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was the voice of someone who has processed something significant and has chosen to put the feeling of it aside in favor of the work that the feeling demands. All right, he said, the parallel filing structure you described. I need the technical details of the timer mechanism and the contact information for the foreign intelligence back channel. Not to access them, to account for them in the protective architecture of what we build here. Emily gave him everything he asked for. She gave it with the fluency of someone reciting something that has been memorized, not because memorization was required, but because it had been thought about so many times that it had become part of the furniture of the mind. Walker listened and tracked and occasionally looked at Reed, who looked back at him with the specific expression that meant, "This is real and it is working, and we need to stay focused." At 1 hour and 20 minutes, Hayes finished the secondary verification that Brooks had requested an independent technical confirmation of the module's authenticity, using Brooks's own equipment and a different analytical approach than the one Hayes had used the first time. The results were identical. The evidence held from every angle. Hayes said so in writing on one of Brooks's legal pads and dated and signed it, which Walker understood was Brooks building a contemporaneous record of the verification process that would be part of the evidentiary chain. At 1 hour and 44 minutes, Brooks set down his pen and looked at the table. He looked at all four of them. "I'm going to tell you what happens now," he said. "Not what I hope happens, what I have structured to happen based on everything in front of me." He picked up the legal pad. "In the next 4 hours, I'm going to make 7 phone calls. 2 to people in the federal judiciary who I trust completely and who have no connection to any agency named in these files. 2 to state attorneys general, different states, different jurisdictions, who have the authority to initiate parallel state investigations that cannot be federally preempted. 1 to a specific congressional oversight contact who has been waiting for something like this for 3 years and who has the institutional authority to convene a closed session review that operates under its own protective classification." He paused. "And 2 calls to people in the press, not to release the financial layer that stays controlled through your timer mechanism until we have legal protection in place, but to establish the existence of an ongoing investigation in enough public awareness that making it disappear becomes significantly more costly than letting it proceed." He looked at Emily. "The moment those calls are made, the situation changes permanently. The people in these files will know within hours that the evidence is out of their reach. They will pivot from suppression to damage control. There will be legal action. There will be political action. There will be pressure of a kind that I want to be honest with you about. It will be significant, and it will be personal, and it will be sustained." "I know," Emily said. "It may take years," Brooks said. "The first indictments, if we get them, may be years away. The full picture may not be public for longer than that." "I know," she said again. "And you," he said, looking at Walker. "Commander, you and your team are going to be in the middle of this in a way that your command structure is not currently aware of, and that is going to require a conversation that I imagine you are not looking forward to." "I've had worse conversations," Walker said. Brooks almost smiled. "I believe you." He looked at the drive one more time, then at Emily. "Is there anything in here that you haven't told me? Anything that is going to change the shape of what I'm describing?" Emily was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that Walker had learned to read as genuine consideration rather than evasion. She was running through the architecture in her mind, checking it against what Brooks had described, looking for gaps. "The 63 missions in the secondary archive," she said, "the ones from before my recruitment, I have not been able to independently verify all of them against external sources. Some of them I can support with the financial records. Some of them I cannot. I want you to know that before you build anything that depends on the full archive being independently verifiable." Brooks nodded. "Which ones can you verify?" 41 of the 63, she said. "The remaining 22 are documented only by the internal archive records. They are authentic. The metadata and technical architecture of those files is consistent with the verified files, but I cannot give you independent corroboration." 41 is sufficient, Brooks said. "More than sufficient." He paused. "Emily, the 412-meter shot, Blackwood." He looked at her directly. "I need to understand your legal exposure here. Not for the files, for what you did." The room was very still. Walker watched Emily's face. She had known this question was coming. She had known it from the moment she agreed to reach out to Brooks, probably from before that. She had known it from the moment she planned the shot, which meant she had been carrying the weight of it alongside everything else. The evidence, the contingencies, the timer mechanism, all of it with the full understanding that the thing that had made all of this possible was also the thing that most directly implicated her. "He ordered the destruction of the vessel carrying me across the Pacific," she said. He ordered it knowing I was on board. He had ordered the deaths of at least 11 people that I can directly document through the mission files in that archive, and the full number connected to the program is almost certainly higher. She paused. I am not asking you to justify what I did. I am telling you what the circumstances were. I understand the circumstances, Brooks said. I'm asking because I need to structure the legal protection correctly. There is a significant difference between the path forward if your involvement in Blackwood's death is documented in these files and the path forward if it is not. It's documented, Emily said. I documented it myself, in the same file structure as the other 17 missions. Same format, same data architecture, same level of detail. She held Brooks's gaze. I am not asking for a version of this where what I did disappears. I am asking for a version where it is understood in the full context of what he did and what the program did and what the people whose names are in those authorization documents did. Brooks looked at her for a long time. Then he said something that Walker had not expected in a voice that was quiet enough that it felt almost private despite the presence of everyone else in the room. You know what the letter you sent me said at the end, after all the evidentiary detail and the operational description and the documentation of the authorization structure? He waited. It said, I am not asking to be forgiven. I am asking to be understood. And if understanding is not possible, I am asking for the truth to be seen. Emily said nothing. I have read that sentence, Brooks said approximately 60 times in 14 months. He set down his pen. I think I can do better than just seeing it. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight and texture, and that nobody wants to be the first to break, because breaking it would diminish something that needs to exist for exactly as long as it takes to fully arrive. It was Reed who finally moved, and he moved because his phone buzzed, and Reed's phone buzzing during a sensitive operation was never something that could be set aside. He looked at it. He looked at Walker. My contact at Whidbey said, the vehicles that were following us, he paused. They pulled off 20 minutes ago, all of them, simultaneously. Walker's first reaction was relief. His second reaction, arriving approximately 1 second behind the first, was the opposite of relief. Simultaneously, he said. Simultaneously, Reed confirmed. Walker looked at Emily. She was already ahead of him, already running the same calculation, her expression doing the thing it did when she was processing rapidly and not liking the result. They didn't give up, she said. No, Walker agreed. They're repositioning, she said. They've recalculated. They know we reached someone. They know the evidence is no longer solely in our possession. She looked at Brooks. Mr. Brooks, how quickly can you make those 7 calls? I can start now, Brooks said. Start now, Emily said. Brooks picked up his phone. He looked at Walker once, a look that communicated several things simultaneously, the most important of which was that he understood the urgency and was not going to argue about it, and then he walked to the far side of the room and began dialing. Walker turned to Hayes. The backup copies, status. All 3 are current and synced, Hayes said. The off-site copies are in locations that cannot be accessed without physical presence and dual authentication. If something happens to the drive, the evidence survives, Hayes said. That's the point of 3 copies. Walker nodded. He looked at Emily. The timer mechanism. If something happens to you, the packages release in 72 hours, she said. Brooks has the signal protocol now. He can extend the timer if the situation requires it. He can also accelerate the release if the situation requires that. She paused. I built it so that I am no longer the single point of failure. That was the whole point. Walker heard that sentence and understood it in a way that went beyond its operational meaning. She had spent 12 years being built into a single point of failure for other people's objectives. The entire architecture of what she had constructed, the module, the contingencies, the parallel filing structure, the timer mechanism, the letter to Brooks, all of it was the work of a person who had learned through the most brutal possible education what it means to be the only copy of something important, and who had spent the last 3 years making absolutely certain she would never be in that position again. Emily, Walker said. She looked at him. The shot, he said. The 112-meter shot. I need to understand something. He paused. Not for the case. Not for Brooks. For me. She waited. At that distance, he said. With one shot 90 seconds to move, you could have missed. A dozen variables could have shifted in the last half second. Wind, target movement, equipment, any one of them. He held her gaze. You have been exactly right about everything else since we found you in the water. You calculated everything down to the last contingency, but that shot you could not control every variable. Emily looked at him steadily for a long moment. No, she said, I couldn't. So you accepted that it might not work? Yes, she said, and you took it anyway. Yes, she said, and then in a voice that was quieter and more unguarded than anything she had said since Reed had touched her shoulder on that wreckage in the ocean, because not taking it was not something I was willing to do. Not after everything. Not after Julia Reyes and Thomas Vega and Sarah Chen and all the rest of them. She looked at the rifle on the table. I could not control every variable, but I could control the choice. I could control whether I tried. She looked back at Walker. So I tried. Walker said nothing for a moment. Then he said, the 3 seconds you spent saying his name. Something crossed Emily Carter's face that Walker had no precise name for. It was not grief, and it was not anger, and it was not relief. It was something older and more complicated than any of those, the specific emotional compound that belongs to a person who has done something they cannot undo and who has chosen to carry it fully rather than at a distance. It felt like the right thing to do, she said simply. To say the name of every person who couldn't. Walker held her gaze. Across the room, Brooks was making his second call. His voice was low and rapid and carried the specific quality of a man who has been waiting to make exactly this call for longer than he has told anyone. Hayes was at the table running a final verification pass on the secondary archive files. Reed was at the window watching. And Walker sat with Emily Carter in the specific silence of two people who have been through something together that neither of them will ever be able to fully explain to anyone who was not there. And he thought about a heat signature on a thermal display over the North Pacific at 5:40 in the morning that his brain had immediately registered as impossible. She was not impossible. She was the most meticulously possible person he had ever met, every capability, every contingency, every choice. Constructed with the specific intentionality of someone who understood that preparation is the only thing that reliably bridges the gap between what is and what needs to be. But she was also sitting across from him with a rifle on the table and 3 days of North Pacific survival in her recent past and 12 years of institutional weight in her older past, and she was 31 years old, and the question Brooks had asked her, "Are you all right?" was the question that Walker found himself unable to stop returning to. Emily, he said, yes. After this is done, he said, after Brooks has made his calls and the packages are in the right hands and the legal architecture is in place. He paused. What do you want? She looked at him as though the question was in a language she had not heard in a long time and needed a moment to translate. I don't know, she said finally. And the fact that she said it, that she admitted the not knowing which required a specific kind of trust that she had not been extending to anyone when he found her on that wreckage, told Walker something that he stored carefully in the part of his mind where he kept the things that mattered. That's okay, he said. She looked at him. Not knowing is okay, he said. You've been planning the next move for 3 years. You're allowed to not know what comes after the last one. From across the room, Brooks's voice carried the specific cadence of someone delivering information to a person who has been waiting for it and who is receiving it with the gravity it deserves. His third call, moving fast, the architecture going into place one call at a time. Hayes looked up from the laptop. Walker, he said, what? The secondary archive, the pre-recruitment missions. He paused. There's a file in here that's different from the others, not a mission file, an internal communications record. He turned the laptop around. From the founding of the program, a memo establishing the operational parameters in the chain of accountability. He looked at Walker, then at Emily. Emily, did you know this was in the archive? What memo, she said. She was on her feet and at the table before the sentence finished. She read it. Walker watched her face as she read it. He watched the specific quality of stillness that moved through her body when she reached whatever the significant portion was, the place in the document that changed something. She straightened up. She looked at Hayes. When did this file originate? She asked. Her voice was completely controlled. Completely. The metadata puts it at 15 years ago, Hayes said, consistent with the founding timeline of the program. The author, she said, listed in the document header, Hayes said. You can see it. Emily looked at the document again. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Walker. And Walker saw something on her face that he had not seen there at any point in the compressed, extraordinary hours since Reed had pulled her out of the North Pacific. Not fear, not anger, not the cold, focused clarity of operational response. Something that was more fundamental than any of those. The look of a person who has just discovered that the thing they thought they were fighting was a smaller version of the thing they were actually fighting. "Walker," she said. "I see it," he said. He had looked at the screen when she straightened up, and he had seen the name in the document header, and he understood immediately what it meant for everything that Brooks was building in his calls across the room, and what it meant for the legal architecture, and what it meant for the people whose names were in the financial records, and what it meant for the 41 individuals in the 15 years in the 63 missions. It meant the program was older than they knew. It meant the person who had built it was still operating. It meant the 41 names in the financial records were not the top of the architecture. They were the middle of it. "Brooks," Walker said. Brooks was mid-sentence on his phone. He looked up. Walker held up one hand. 5 minutes? Brooks nodded and continued his call, but his eyes stayed on Walker, and Walker saw in them the recognition of a man who has just registered that the situation has changed in a way he cannot yet quantify. Walker looked at Emily. "How does this change your structure?" he asked, because that was the relevant question, not what it meant in the abstract, what it changed in the concrete architecture of what they were building. Emily was already working through it. He could see it happening, the rapid internal assessment, the recalculation of dependencies, the identification of which contingencies held under the new information and which needed to be rebuilt. "The timer mechanism holds," she said. "The parallel filing structure holds. The primary evidence package for Brooks holds." She paused. "What changes is the scope of who needs to be in the room when the formal proceeding begins. There is a person who is not currently in Brooks's calculation who needs to be." She looked at the document on the screen one more time. "And there is a piece of evidence that I did not know I had that changes the origin story of the entire program in a way that matters for the legal case." "How much?" Walker asked. "Significantly," she said. And then quietly, almost to herself, "I thought I knew the shape of this. I thought I had seen the whole thing." She looked at the rifle on the table, at the instrument she had spent 2.5 years building into evidence. "I hadn't seen the whole thing." Hayes looked at her. Does that change what you've built? Does it undermine it?" "No," she said immediately. "What I built is what it is, and it holds. It always held." She paused. "It just holds against something bigger than I knew." Brooks ended his call and crossed the room. He looked at the laptop screen. He read the document. He read it twice. He set his phone down on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man making a conscious decision not to throw it. 15 years, he said. "At least," Emily said. "And the person in that header is not in the financial records," Emily said, "which means they were careful enough to keep their financial exposure completely separated from the operational structure. The people in the financial records are one step down from the actual originating authority." Brooks looked at Walker. Walker looked at Brooks. Between them, without words, the understanding passed that this was the thing they could not have predicted, and that changed the timeline and the protective architecture and the scope of everything Brooks was building in his phone calls, and that had to be integrated immediately rather than addressed later. "Fourth call," Brooks said, picking up the phone again. "I need to add a name to the list." He looked at Emily. She told him the name. Brooks dialed. And Emily Carter stood in that room at 8:03 in the morning, having survived 3 days in the North Pacific and 1 firefight in a facility corridor and 1 high-speed pursuit on a dark road, and 12 years of being built into something she had not chosen, stood in that room with the rifle on the table and the evidence in multiple hands and the timer running and the calls going out, and she looked at Walker with those cold blue eyes that were the color of the same ocean that was supposed to have killed her. And Walker looked back, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said that had not already been said or done or decided, and because sometimes the right thing is not a word but a presence, the specific, steady presence of a person who decided to stay and who is still there. Outside, the morning was fully arrived. Real light now, not the gray edge of pre-dawn, but the actual bright, committed light of a day that has decided to begin regardless of what the people inside various rooms across the country needed to hold off for. Somewhere in the structure of what Brooks was building, the first pieces were going into place. Somewhere in the timer mechanism that Emily had built across 14 months of solitary preparation, the counter was running and the packages were waiting and the architecture was holding the way. Good architecture holds not because nothing pushes against it, but because it was built by someone who understood exactly what it would have to withstand. The evidence was out of reach. The truth had more than one home now, and the woman who had built it that way stood in a room with three men who had chosen to stay beside her, and a prosecutor who had been waiting 14 months to receive what she had carried across the ocean. And she breathed steadily, and she waited, and she did not look like someone who had been broken by any of it. She looked like someone who had known through all of it that this morning was coming, and had refused to die before she got here. Brooks made his seventh call at 8:47 in the morning. He stood with his back to the room, his voice low and steady, and the people listening to him on the other end of that call were people who had the specific kind of authority that does not appear in organizational charts, but that determines what actually happens when institutional power is challenged by evidence that cannot be dismissed. Walker listened to half of what Brooks said and tracked the rest from the quality of the pauses, the way Brooks listened, the way he adjusted his language in real time, the way his posture shifted from the first 30 seconds to the last 30 seconds of the call. When Brooks hung up, he stood with his back to the room for a moment longer than was necessary. Just standing, breathing, the way you do when you have just finished something that you have been building toward for a long time, and your body needs a moment to accept that the building is done and the structure is now standing on its own. Then he turned around. "It's in motion," he said. Walker looked at him. All seven are," Brooks confirmed. "The parallel state investigations are initiated. Both AGs have the documentation they need to proceed independently. The Congressional Oversight Contact has convened a closed session for tomorrow morning, which is faster than I have ever seen that process move, which tells me the people in that room have been waiting for something like this and are not going to waste the opportunity." He paused. "The press contacts have what they need to establish public awareness without compromising the criminal case. The Foreign Intelligence back channel has been activated through Emily's protocol." He looked at Emily directly. "And the two federal judges have the sealed evidentiary record, which means from this moment forward, the evidence exists in a legal context that cannot be unilaterally suppressed regardless of what happens to any of us in this room." The room absorbed that. Hayes let out a breath that he had apparently been holding for some time. Reed at the window did not visibly react, but something in the quality of his stillness changed the specific shift from active watchfulness to the slightly different watchfulness of someone who is still alert but has registered that the most critical threshold has been passed. Emily said nothing. She was looking at Brooks with an expression that Walker had not seen on her face before, and it took him a moment to identify it because it was so unfamiliar in the context of everything he had seen her express over the previous hours. She looked young, not young in the naive sense, not young in the unformed sense. She was 31 years old and carried 12 years of experience that most people could not imagine, and none of that had gone anywhere. But in that specific moment, with those specific words from Brooks landing in the room, and the structure she had spent 3 years building, finally standing on ground that others were holding, she looked the age she actually was. She looked like a 31-year-old woman who had just been told that a weight she had been carrying alone was now distributed across enough points of support that she did not have to carry it the same way anymore. She looked like someone who might eventually be able to put it down. "Emily," Brooks said. She looked at him. "I need you to understand something about the timeline from here," he said. "The formal proceedings, the indictments, the public disclosure, the full legal process, this will take time. Months at minimum, more likely a year or longer for the complete picture to be in public view." He paused. "The people in those files are going to fight this. They have resources, they have legal teams, they have relationships in every institution that will be involved in the process. None of what we have built this morning guarantees a specific outcome." "I know," Emily said. "What it guarantees," Brooks continued, "is that the truth is no longer solely in your possession. It cannot be made to disappear by making you disappear. The architecture you built, the parallel structure, the multiple jurisdictions, the timer mechanism, it was the right design. It is the reason that what we built this morning is defensible against the kind of pressure that is going to be applied against it." "I know," she said again, softer. I want you to actually hear that, Brooks said, not process it as information. Hear it. He looked at her steadily. You did this correctly, in circumstances that were designed at every stage to prevent you from doing it at all. You did it correctly. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Tell me that again, she said, when the first indictment comes through. Brooks almost smiled. I'll call you personally, he said. Walker looked at the time, 9:02 in the morning. 12 hours ago, give or take, he had been looking at a thermal display over the North Pacific at 5:40 in the morning, and thinking that the heat signature he was seeing was not possible. It felt like a different era. It felt like something that had happened to a different version of himself, the version that had not yet sat in a secure room and watched a woman reconstruct the architecture of her own survival while simultaneously building the legal case that would expose the people who had tried to prevent it. His radio crackled. He stepped away from the table to take it. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Carver, spoke in the compressed, efficient language of someone who has information that needs to be delivered quickly and clearly. Two of the contractors recovered from the facility had been identified through a separate intelligence channel. They were private security employees of a company with documented financial connections to Meridian Global Security Solutions. Carver had the documentation. More importantly, Carver had flagged something else, a communication intercept from the previous night that suggested the withdrawal of the pursuing vehicles had not been a retreat. It was a coordination signal, Carver said. They were not pulling back. They were converging on a secondary location. Which location? Walker asked. Carver told him. Walker turned back to the room. Brooks, he said. Brooks looked up from his legal duties. Your office, Walker said. They're at your office. Brooks was very still for a moment. My staff, he said. Carver says the building was accessed at 7:40 this morning, 30 minutes before your office officially opens. Electronic access log shows an entry using a valid credential. That credential was deactivated 2 months ago, Brooks said. His voice had the quality of someone who is working very hard to stay operational while a personal concern is pressing against the inside of his chest. My assistant flagged it as compromised, and I had it pulled from the system. Someone reinstated it, Walker said. Brooks picked up his phone. He dialed. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. He lowered the phone and looked at Walker with an expression that Walker recognized immediately, the look of a person who has just called someone they care about and not gotten an answer in a situation where not answering is not a neutral event. My paralegal, Brooks said. She comes in at 7:30. Walker looked at Reed. Reed was already on his phone, and Walker heard him speaking to Carver in the rapid, specific language of someone coordinating an immediate response to a developing situation. Within 90 seconds, Reed had eyes on the building through Carver's position. Within 3 minutes, Carver's team had confirmed presence of at least 2 individuals inside the office who did not belong there. And within 4 minutes, the call Walker had been half expecting arrived on his radio. It was not Carver. It was a voice he did not recognize. Male. Professionally calm in the specific way of someone who has trained their voice to stay even, because an even voice is a tactical advantage. Commander Walker, the voice said. Walker did not respond immediately. He looked at Emily, who had moved to beside him the moment the radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. She was listening. I know you can hear me, the voice said. I'm using your own communication channel, which tells you something about the kind of access we have. I want to have a direct conversation. No intermediaries. You're talking, Walker said. The evidence you transferred this morning is not what you think it is, the voice said. I want you to understand that before this goes further, the module contains accurate mission data. It does not contain an accurate picture of why those missions were conducted or who authorized them at the highest level. We have the authorization documents, Walker said. You have documents that were constructed to be found, the voice said. In the event that the program was ever compromised, there is a prepared narrative, a set of documentation that directs attention towards specific individuals and away from others. What you have is that narrative. Walker kept his face neutral. Across the table, he watched Hayes begin typing rapidly, running a verification check on something. Walker assumed the communications channel itself, trying to identify origin or establish whether the voice was attempting a technical intrusion alongside the verbal one. Who are you? Walker asked. Someone who was in that program before Emily Carter was recruited, the voice said. Someone who knows things about its origins and its actual authorization chain that are not in any file she built. Walker looked at Emily. Her expression was completely controlled. Her eyes were moving in the specific way they moved when she was processing, rapidly tracking something, calculating something, running a chain of logic at a speed that her face barely showed. "Prove it," Walker said into the radio. "The founding memo," the voice said. "The document you found in the secondary archive this morning. The name in the header." Walker's hand tightened slightly on the radio. He had not transmitted anything about the founding memo. He had not discussed it on any channel. The only people who knew about it were in this room. "What about it?" Walker said. "That name is not the author," the voice said. "That name is a constructed attribution. The actual author of that document is someone who died 4 years ago of causes that were classified as natural and that were not." A pause. "I can give you the real name. I can give you documentation that supports it. And I can give you the thing that Emily Carter does not have the connection between the program's founding and the current active authorization structure, which runs through a different institution than anything in her files." Walker looked at Brooks. Brooks was writing rapidly. Hayes held up his laptop, a tracing result. The communication was bouncing through multiple relays. "Origin unidentifiable with current equipment." "What do you want?" Walker asked the voice. "I want the same thing Emily Carter wants," the voice said. "I want the people at the top of this to be identified. Not the financial layer, not the operational layer, the actual top." Another pause. "The difference is that I have been inside this program for 20 years. I know things she was never cleared to know, and I am willing to give them to you if you give me something in return." "What?" "Inclusion in the protective architecture Brooks is building," the voice said. "The same legal standing that Emily currently has. Witness status, not immunity. I am not asking for immunity. I am asking for the same thing she asked for, to be understood in context." Walker lowered the radio. He looked at Emily. Her expression had not changed. She was looking at the radio with those cold blue eyes, and Walker watched her work through it. The same rapid internal processing he had seen a dozen times in the past 12 hours. The same architecture of thought that had kept her alive in the North Pacific and in the facility corridor and on the dark road and in every moment between. "It's real," she said quietly. "You know who this is," Walker said. It was not a question. "I don't know the identity," she said. "But the information is real. The founding document has always bothered me. The attributed authorship didn't match the writing style of the other documents from the same period. I noticed it and couldn't resolve it." She paused. "Someone inside the program for 20 years would have been there when that document was created. They would know the actual authorship." "It could be a diversion," Hayes said. "Get us chasing a new thread while someone moves on the evidence structure." "The evidence structure is already in place," Brooks said quietly. He had looked up from his legal pad. "The 7 calls are made. The sealed record is with the judges. Whatever this person tells us or doesn't tell us, the architecture we built this morning holds." He looked at Walker. "The question is whether there is a higher level of the program that our current evidence doesn't reach. And if there is..." He stopped. He looked at Emily. "If there is, does our current case reach the people at the actual top, or does it stop one level below them?" The room was quiet. Emily looked at Brooks. She looked at the radio in Walker's hand. She looked at the rifle on the table, the instrument she had built and carried and protected through the North Pacific and through everything after it, the thing that connected every piece of the evidence she had spent 3 years assembling. "Pick it back up," she said to Walker. "Tell them we're listening." Walker raised the radio. "We're listening," he said. "There's a location," the voice said. "A physical location containing original documentation that I have been holding for 11 years. Not copies. Originals. Signed. Dated. With a chain of custody that predates anything in Emily's module." A pause. "The location is in Seattle. I can have you there in 2 hours." "Why now?" Walker asked. 20 years inside this program. Why now?" The voice was quiet for a moment. When it came back, something in its quality had changed, not much but enough. The specific shift of someone who has prepared a tactical answer and then decided in the moment to give a different kind of answer instead. "Because Emily Carter survived the Pacific," the voice said, "and I have been waiting for someone to survive the Pacific for 11 years. Walker looked at Emily. She was very still. "What does that mean?" Walker said into the radio. "It means I'm not the first person who tried to do what she did," the voice said. "I'm the first person who tried and didn't make it far enough. Emily is the reason I'm making this call instead of the reason I stopped making calls 11 years ago. Another pause. I was the one who designed the data architecture that she used to build her module. I created the recording system template. I hid it in the program's technical infrastructure 11 years ago, hoping someone would find it and understand what it was for. The voice was quiet for a moment. She found it. She understood it. She built something I was never able to build. And she survived. The room was completely silent. Walker looked at Emily. Her face had gone through something in the last 30 seconds that he could not fully catalog, a sequence of expressions moving too fast for any individual one to fully arrive before the next one came. Not quite shock, not quite recognition. Something between them, the specific emotional experience of receiving information that simultaneously explains and complicates everything you thought you understood. The module architecture, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I thought I designed it. You designed the content structure, the voice said. The underlying recording framework, the data capture methodology, the encryption layering, the physical integration protocol, that framework existed in the program's technical archive, hidden in a maintenance subroutine. I put it there 11 years ago, hoping someone inside would find it. I found it in year 7, Emily said, not to the radio, to the room, to herself. I thought I was building something original. She stopped. You built something original, the voice said. What you built with the framework is yours. The content, the evidence, the mission files, the financial layer, none of that was in what I left. You created all of it. A pause that carried real weight. I gave you the instrument. You chose what to play. Walker watched Emily process this. He watched the specific way she absorbed information that restructured the story she had been telling herself, not collapsing it, not undermining it, but expanding it, revealing that she had not been working entirely alone, even in the years when she had believed completely that she was. Name, Walker said into the radio. Give us a name. A pause. Victor Ashworth, the voice said. 11 years ago, I was the program's technical director, before they decided I knew too much and arranged the heart attack that didn't quite work. Another pause. I have been very careful for 11 years. I have been waiting, and I think we should meet. Brooks had already written the name. He was already running it against something on his phone. He looked up at Walker and gave a single nod. The nod that means this name is real and is connected to something I can verify. 2 hours, Walker said into the radio. Send the location through Emily's encrypted channel. The radio went quiet. Walker lowered it. The room held the silence for a moment, the way rooms hold things when the information inside them has just expanded beyond what everyone expected to be carrying when they woke up that morning. Reed spoke first. This changes the scope. Yes, Walker said. The 7th call, Hayes said, looking at Brooks. Does it hold if there's a higher authorization layer we haven't identified yet? The 7th call holds, Brooks said. He set his phone down. His voice was even and certain in the specific way of someone who has built structures that are designed to hold under exactly this kind of pressure. What we built this morning is not contingent on having identified every level of the program. It is contingent on having authentic evidence of the levels we have identified. That evidence is real, and it is verified, and it is in sealed legal custody. He paused. If Ashworth has documentation of a higher level, it adds to what we have. It does not replace it. It does not undermine it. He looked at Emily. Your case is not weakened by the existence of something above it. It is the foundation that makes everything above it reachable. Emily heard that. Walker watched her hear it, the specific physical response of someone receiving a piece of information that settles something that has been unsettled for a long time. Not the big dramatic things, the small structural thing. The foundation holds. She picked up the rifle from the table. Not in readiness, not in the operational way. She picked it up the way you pick up something that has been with you for a long time and that you are looking at differently than you have been looking at it. She turned it over in her hands. Victor Ashworth built the architecture I used to record everything, she said. I spent 2.5 years thinking I was building something alone, and the instrument I was building it with was already designed for exactly this purpose by someone who was trying to do the same thing 11 years before me. She looked at the rifle. He gave me the instrument. I built the evidence. She paused. And now he's giving us the next level. Are you ready to meet him? Walker asked. She looked at him. Yes, she said. And then I'll drive, Reed said from the window, and the specific dry certainty of it cut through the weight in the room in exactly the way that Reed always managed to cut through weight. Weight not dismissing it, just refusing to let it become heavier than the situation required. Hayes was already packing the laptop. Brooks was on his phone again, making what Walker assumed was an eighth call, adding the name Victor Ashworth to the protective architecture, sealing it inside the legal structure before they walked into any room with the man. Smart. The right move. Brooks was consistently making the right move. They left the property at 9:31 in the morning. The location Ashworth sent through Emily's encrypted channel was a storage facility on the south side of Seattle, the kind of place that exists in every city that stores the accumulated objects of lives in transition that nobody looks at twice. Unit 114, access code sent alongside the location. A code that Emily looked at for a long moment before she entered it, because the numerical sequence was a variation on the encryption key she had used for the module, and the variation was not random. It was a signature. The kind of thing a person does when they want to be recognized without announcing themselves, a professional calling card left inside a technical artifact for someone with the skill to read it. He's been watching my work, Emily said quietly as they pulled into the facility. For how long? Walker asked. Long enough to know my encryption preferences, she said. Victor Ashworth was already inside the unit when they arrived. He was 63 years old, which was younger than Walker had expected, given 11 years of what he described as living very carefully. He was thin in the way of someone who has been under sustained stress for a long time. He had gray eyes and the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent years being very conscious of how they move in spaces where being noticed can have consequences. He looked at Emily for a long time when she walked through the door. She looked back at him. You found it in year 7, he said. Not a question. The maintenance subroutine. Year 7, month 3, she said. I thought it was a legacy system artifact. I almost archived it without reading the full code structure. But you read it. I read everything, she said. Something that might have been relief moved across Ashworth's face. I know, he said. I have been watching the technical signatures coming out of the program's maintenance logs for 11 years. When I saw the modification pattern in year 8, the specific way the recording framework was being integrated into a physical weapon system, I knew someone had found it. I didn't know who. I didn't know if they understood what it was for. He paused. Then the mission log started building, and I understood. You've been watching the whole time, Emily said. I couldn't do anything from where I was, he said. I had no direct access. I couldn't make contact without compromising both of us. All I could do was watch the logs and know that someone inside was doing what I had failed to do. He looked at her steadily. I am sorry I couldn't help you sooner. Emily was quiet for a moment. You helped me before I knew I needed help, she said. That counts. Ashworth opened a metal cabinet at the back of the unit. It contained a sealed archive box, physical documents, not digital, the originals he had described on the radio. He set it on the table. The founding documentation, he said, the real founding documentation, the actual authorship of the program, the authorization chain as it existed at inception and as it has been maintained for 15 years. He looked at Brooks, who had come in behind Walker and who was looking at the box with the expression of a man who has been building a legal case for the last several hours and is now looking at the piece of the foundation that changes everything above it. The person at the top of this authorization chain is not in Emily's files. They are not in the financial records. They have been completely insulated from the operational and financial layers for the full 15 years the program has existed. Who, Brooks said. Ashworth looked at Emily, not at Brooks, at Emily. I want her to know first, he said, before it goes into any legal record, before it becomes a case. I want the person who built the evidence to hear it from me directly because she is the reason any of this is possible. Emily stepped forward. Ashworth leaned toward her and said the name quietly, just to her, just in that space between two people who had been on the same side of something without knowing each other for a very long time. Walker watched Emily's face. He watched her receive the name. He watched what it did to her, not dramatically, not in collapse or visible shock, but in the specific bone-deep way that the final piece of a structure settles when it drops into the place it was always meant to occupy by, the quiet completion of something that has been missing and that the absence of has been felt in every other piece. She looked at Ashworth. "Does the documentation prove it?" she said. "Completely," he said. She nodded once. Then she turned to Brooks. She said the name clearly for the record in the presence of everyone in the room. Brooks wrote it down. He wrote it down and underlined it and looked at it on the page for a long moment. Then he looked up at Walker, and Walker saw in Brooks's face the expression of a man who has spent his professional life understanding that the most powerful people in any system are the ones most insulated from its consequences, and who is looking at the name that proves that understanding was correct, and who is also looking at the documentation that makes that insulation for the first time insufficient. "Ninth call," Brooks said. He stepped away from the table. He made the call. It took 7 minutes during which the room held a specific quality of silence that was different from any other silence Walker had experienced in the past 14 hours. Not the silence of waiting, not the silence of processing, but the silence of people standing at the threshold of something that is permanently, irrevocably different from everything that came before it. When Brooks came back, his face was the face of a man who has just placed the last stone of a structure that he is going to spend the next several years standing behind. "It's done," he said. Walker looked at Emily. She was holding the rifle, not at ready, not an operational carry, holding it the way you hold something that has been through everything with you, that has been the connective tissue between who you were and who you needed to become and who you are now, standing in the remains of what you built. "Emily," and Walker said. She looked at him. "It's done," he said. She held his gaze. And in those cold blue eyes that were the color of the ocean, that was supposed to have killed her, in those eyes that had opened on a piece of wreckage in the North Pacific and assessed a rescue swimmer and released his wrist the moment they registered, he was not a threat. Walker saw something that he had been watching for through all of it, through every hour of the past 14, through every calculation and contingency and crisis and revelation. He saw her, not the operator, not the program asset, not the survivor, not the woman holding the evidence that was going to bring down 15 years of institutional corruption. Just Emily Carter, 31 years old, who had been handed a gift she never asked for at the age of 17, and who had spent 12 years inside something that tried to take everything from her, and who had spent 3 more years turning the instrument of her own exploitation into the most precisely constructed case for truth and accountability that any of the people in that room had ever seen. Just her. "What happens to me now?" she asked. And the question was not afraid. It was not strategic. It was the plainest question possible from a person who has been so focused on the goal for so long that the territory beyond it is genuinely uncharted. "That depends on what you want," Walker said. She looked at the rifle. She set it on the table. She did not pick it back up. "I want to find Sarah Chenard," she said, "the researcher I told to run. I want to tell her she can stop." She paused. "And I want to find Julia Reyes's family. I want to tell them the truth about what happened to her. Not the official version, the real one." She looked at Walker. "After that, I don't know yet." "That's enough for now," Walker said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Reed, who gave her the slight nod of a man who respects what he has seen and does not need to make a speech about it. She looked at Hayes, who was already building the formal evidentiary record of everything that had happened in this room, and who looked up just long enough to meet her eyes before going back to the work that he processed everything difficult through. She looked at Ashworth, who had been waiting 11 years for the moment she had created, and who looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has been carrying a thing for so long that setting it down feels like learning to walk differently. And she looked at Brooks. "You said you'd call me when the first indictment comes through," she said. "I will," Brooks said. "I'm going to hold you to that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." 4 months later, the first sealed indictment was filed in federal court. 6 months after them, 2 more followed, one federal one, through the parallel state investigation that Brooks had initiated that first morning, the one that operated outside the reach of the institutional pressure that immediately and predictably mobilized against the federal case. The pressure was significant. It was sustained. Brooks had been right about that. The legal teams were formidable, and the political maneuvering was sophisticated, and there were moments in the months that followed when Walker, watching from the institutional distance that his command position required him to maintain publicly, while he supported the case through every private channel available to him, wondered whether the architecture would hold. It held. It held because Emily had built it to hold. It held because it was distributed across too many jurisdictions and too many independent verification chains to be suppressed from any single point of control. It held because Victor Ashworth's physical documentation provided the founding level evidence that connected the operational layer to the highest authorization in a way that could not be explained away or reframed or discredited. And it held because Nathan Brooks was exactly the kind of man who does not allow the thing he is building to be dismantled, regardless of the pressure applied against it, and who had in his quiet, methodical way been building toward exactly this case for 3 years before Emily Carter's letter arrived. Walker heard from Emily twice in those months, both times through the encrypted channel she maintained through an address she did not identify. Both times brief. The first time to tell him that she had found Sarah Chen, who was living under a different name in a country she had not named in her message, and that Sarah Chen had cried for 40 minutes when Emily told her it was over. The second time to tell him that she had located Julia Reyes' sister and that the conversation had been the hardest thing she had done since refusing Mission 12 and that she had done it anyway. Hayes had framed the verification report he had written on Brooks's legal pad that morning. It hung in his workspace, not as a trophy, as a reminder of what good work looked like when the stakes were what they were. Reed did not frame anything. Reed was not a framing type of person, but Walker knew because Reed had told him once quietly over coffee that the 11 minutes he had spent on that perimeter check before they exited the vehicle at Ashworth's storage unit, the 11 minutes that had come back clean, were the 11 minutes he was most proud of in his career. Not because they were dramatic, because they were right. And Walker himself, Commander Ethan Walker, 22 years in naval aviation, who had changed a helicopter's landing destination on instinct at 5:40 in the morning, based on a heat signature that should not have existed. Walker thought about the moment every few days, not obsessively, but consistently, the way you think about things that reset your understanding of what is possible. He thought about a thermal display over the North Pacific. I thought about a heat signature that should not have been there. He thought about a woman lying on broken wreckage, holding a rifle with her finger outside the trigger guard. He thought about cold blue eyes that opened completely and immediately and looked at Marcus Reed and released his wrist the moment they registered he was not a threat. I thought about 12 years and 17 missions in a 112-meter shot on a man who had signed a death order over breakfast without looking up from his coffee. He thought about the 3 seconds she had spent saying his name and whose name she had been saying alongside his and what it meant that she had done it. He thought about what she had said when he asked her what she wanted and the fact that the first 2 things she named were not things for herself. I thought about a rifle on a table, set down, not picked back up. The world saw a legendary shot, a number, a distance, a technical achievement that violated the understood limits of what was physically achievable. The world would talk about the 112-meter shot for years in military circles, in marksmanship communities, in the coverage of the trials that eventually brought 11 indictments across 4 jurisdictions and ended careers that had seemed untouchable, and reached the person whose name Ashworth had given to Emily first, before it went into any legal record in that storage unit, on a morning when the architecture of 15 years of institutional corruption finally met something it was not designed to withstand. The SEALs saw something different. They saw a woman who had been handed a tool of violence and spent 3 years converting it into a tool of accountability. They saw a person who had been told through 12 years of institutional construction that she was a weapon and who had understood at a specific and irreversible moment involving a researcher named Sarah Chen in a mission she refused that weapons do not choose. They are chosen, and the choice belongs to the person holding them. She had made her choice. She had baited in the freezing water of the North Pacific, holding onto a rifle with her finger outside the trigger guard, keeping herself alive, not because she wanted to survive, but because she refused to let the people who tried to erase her succeed before the truth was seen. She had made it on a piece of wreckage 200 miles off the coast of Washington, in water that should have killed her in conditions that should have been her ending, and she had made it work. Emily Carter had survived being turned into a weapon, and she had used everything they built her to be to dismantle the people who built her. That was not a shot, that was a choice, and nobody, not the ocean, not the contractors, not the 15-year program, with its 41 names and its 63 missions, and its highest authorization, and its carefully constructed insulation from consequences, Nobody had been able to take it from her.